Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 132 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we've made it. We're finally starting 2007. It's been so long. We're finally getting to start a new year. It's that fresh new year smell, that car freshener everyone gets, New Year's scent. We're here. We made it.
Oh, is that what my armpits have been smelling like? That New Year smell? Okay, that's a relief. I thought it was something else. Yeah, it's the season premiere, as I always call these New Year episodes. Even though we are recording this in August, really the most important year for us is the year of the Ring of Honor shows that we're reviewing. So for you, Trevor, and for the listeners, Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, everyone. I was going to say the most important year is the year of our deaths, but of course we never know when that's coming. So,
well, that's
it could be any year.
It could be before we're done recording this. We don't know.
So, Matt, this might be the most notes I have before we get to a show ever. And obviously some of that we'll get to will become apparent to people who do not know there's a serious story we have to cover, but also just a lot of non-serious things because I realized, this was almost like a season premiere for Ring of Honor too, because they took, which was somewhat rare for them at this point, I would think, when they were running so many shows, basically I think a little over a month off between Final Battle 2006 and the first show of 2007. So there was a lot of time for things to happen.
And I know you have more to say, but I just want to say, I think it really was a good idea that they took this much time off. I think Gabe needed it. I think the promotion needed it. I think maybe even the fans needed it. There was just too much late 2006, as we know all too well from having to get through all of it. It was just too much. So I think that a month plus off, I think probably could do a lot of wrestling companies some good.
Yeah, and on top of all the news we got to get to, I also have an update. So, we'll get to that first. For people who listened to the last episode, and if not, shame on you. We went nearly 5 hours for you to do the year-end wrap-up show. One of the things we talked about, of the many things, was Claudio Castagnoli, the incident where everyone thought he was going to WWE, including Claudio, and then WWE pulled out at the last minute, and how to this day, we tried to research the best we could, how to this day Claudio doesn't seem to know what happened. Well, I got a couple notes on that. So the first thing is, we talked about during that episode about how one of the rumors was that Claudio did not have a green card or lied about his work status in the U.S., obviously not coming originally from the U.S. And Brian Alvarez we read it. Brian Alvarez wrote, that could be a possibility. Claudio got pretty peeved with that, to say the least. He wrote online basically a thing where he didn't say Brian by name, but it was clear that was who he was directing it at. Like, I have my green card. This is a pretty shitty thing to say when, about me. And then Brian basically went from saying, well, this is a possibility, to saying in the next week's issue, replying to Claudio and basically saying, well, this is what WWE told me, is that, you lied about your green card, or something to that effect. You can go back and listen to the episode. Well, Matt, two of our more esteemed listeners, and one of them recent former guest, another one the man who hosted our show for the first few episodes, not host as what I'm doing right now, but literally gave us the web space, the nicest man, the Cubs fan. Both David Bixenspan fan and the Cubs fan, I guess, were listening to the episode, and they reached out to me independently on Twitter to both give me the same anecdote, which was, I guess sometime after the whole kerfuffle with Brian Alvarez and Claudio, they were both on the same independent wrestling show. I believe a Fight Sports Midwest, which was a very briefly, shortly lived independent wrestling company. And Claudio went out of his way to apparently on the show Brian his green card. Like, look, I have it. We're both here. You can look at it. So I thought that was a funny anecdote, just imagining how uncomfortable that must have been. But then we got another update, Matt, because I always hate when this happens, but I was looking around for information for future episodes, watching one of the 8 million Chris Hero shoot interviews Hero has done in his career. This one entitled The Chris Hero Story. Comes recommended by me. Rob Naylor does the interview. He covers a lot of his career up to the point he had done. I forget which year this was. But Hero actually has a whole chunk where he talks about this time, including a scenario that wasn't in any of the reports I could find for last episode. So I'll go to – this is a recap I wrote for myself from the shoot interview. I'll just go to it. Hero says everyone in the public thinks WWE backing out of signing Claudio is a visa thing or Claudio being on cocaine, Hero says, which I did not uncover on the last episode. And Hero says –
was that part a joke? Or did he say that with sincerity?
I think Hero's kind of talking like serious because he goes, I think that rumor is hilarious, Hero says, because he goes, if you know anything about Claudio, he says he doesn't know the first thing about a drug other than supplements. I love that Hero says he doesn't know the first thing about drugs. He says he doesn't know the first thing about a drug. It was a very folksy way of saying it, but basically saying that, Claudio is not a drug person. He said, he takes supplements, he works out, but, would never know the first thing about drugs. So I found that here.
That's honestly not surprising at all.
Yeah, I know Claudio's a big coffee guy, so technically,
yeah, I know caffeine. It is
the biggest drug.
It is.
Honestly, just as an aside, I am a big caffeine addict. I briefly smoked like 15 years ago. Quitting smoking, I've tried to quit caffeine. I quit smoking. It was relatively easy for me. Caffeine is way worse than addiction, at least I realize for most people that's not the case, but for me, boy, oh boy, I will die with 2 Diet Cokes in my hand.
I think that it is for a lot of people. Yeah, I don't do caffeine except I do eat chocolate. Does that count?
I don't think unless you're eating like really super dark pure chocolate. I don't think you're getting a ton of a buzz off that. Well, you probably get a little bit of a buzz, but anyway, Hero says Claudio got signed by WWE. He's like kind of recapping what happened at the time in 2006, and he says at the exact same time they also signed Keith Walker and Egotistico Fantastico, and Hero mentions Claudio was supposed to go to OVW, Ohio Valley Wrestling, while the other two were supposed to go to Deep South Wrestling, because those were at this time, those were WWE kind of had 2 developmental little territories. And Hero says Walker and Ego had already moved down to the Deep South territory, but Claudio hadn't moved yet to Louisville, Kentucky for OVW yet, and there was some WWE guy, he says, who was doing the new signings health evaluations, and Hero says at the time of him doing the shoot interview with Rob Naylor, they had only just found out for sure, but that apparently he was pretty confident now that this guy who was doing this health evaluation had fucked up Claudio's health paperwork somehow and told WWE to, as a result, to not go ahead, don't sign Claudio's contract. And then Hero says since WWE didn't know Claudio very well and he hadn't moved to Louisville yet, WWE didn't question the advice and they just released Claudio. And Hero says Claudio then went. He got all his medical tests done again. Everything checked out fine. Hero says it was just a big fuck up. But then Hero adds, it sucks for Claudio, but he thinks Claudio was better because he ended up maturing to one of the best wrestlers in the world. And Hero says, I don't think Claudio would have progressed to where he is today without actually this happening and him having to, stick around for a while. And then Hero says the interesting thing about this period is that he and Claudio during this time were living together, also training together, traveling on road trips together, like 10-hour road trips every week, Hero says, and then, of course, having matches together as a tag team. And so Hero says as a result, when Claudio signed with WWE, they both breathed a sigh of relief that they could finally take a break from each other and they could go back to being buddies, because he says they basically at this point had this rather tense marriage they were spending way too much time together. And he says when Claudio got released, they were both like fuck, and he says Claudio was also generally crushed, rightfully so, that this opportunity got taken from. But he says they had just broken up as a tag act in all these indies, so now they had to wrestle each other everywhere. And then Hero just ends this segment by going, Hero just sarcastically says, produce some fantastic matches, he says. And yeah, we'll get to that in the future on Through the Years. But
yeah, well, let us be the judge of that. But so this was this interview was several years after all this went down. This was like in the 2010s that he was recording that interview.
I believe so, yes. And so the way Hero put it, basically the way, Hero didn't delve into specifics, but the way he basically seemed to put it was basically it was a combination of this guy screwed up the test, and because Claudio was not like already moved down and set up in Ohio Valley Wrestling, and because no one was really knew him that well to really fight for him, it was just really easy to cut him.
Yeah,
it was
he hasn't even really started yet. This health stuff was, I mean, that sounds plausible because isn't that exactly what happened with Nigel McGuinness when he was going to sign with WWE a few years later?
And I think that was a bit different too, where it was something that Nigel didn't deem a problem, like it might have been like one of the torn muscles or something. At least this is what Nigel claims, but it was like WWE was like, "We'll look at you if you get this fixed," but it was like they weren't going to pay for it, so Nigel was going to have to pay for that out of pocket. I mean, this is Nigel's side, who knows, but like I would assume, and so Nigel was just like, "I just decided I." Was not because I guess the way he put it, it was not a guarantee that if he got this fixed, they were still going to sign him. So it was like, I would have to get this expensive surgery. I don't think I need that. I've been working through this, torn bicep or whatever, and no guarantee. But yeah, so WWE has definitely gotten cold feet on people before, and I imagine if they didn't really, they weren't in a rush to sign a guy like Claudio, was probably no skin off their back to just release him. So it definitely sounds like a plausible story. Yeah, sounds as plausible, if not more, than every other story we've heard on this.
Right, I completely buy it. And with Nigel, it's like at least he had TNA also that was just really willing to snatch him right up. It's interesting that they didn't seem to be interested in Claudio.
Yeah, it is very. Honestly, at this period, anytime anyone was like over 6'1" or 6'2" in Ring of Honor, I was always like, why isn't WWE signing these guys up immediately? Because I know WWE was still big into the size, but they were also wanting new talent. I was just like, why wouldn't you go after anyone that's remotely tall? But
well, I mean, with someone like with someone like Chris Hero, you could Vince was very into specific physiques, and Hero definitely didn't have it, so it wasn't like surprising in that sense. But obviously, Claudio Castagnoli felt like chiseled out of granite, and like a kind of a creator wrestler that Vince McMahon would have done, except maybe for the promos and stuff. So yeah, it was surprising that it took so long for him to end up there, but he did, and I guess all's well that ends somehow.
An inspiring quote.
Yes.
And now we get to the news that happened during the last show on this one. As I mentioned, there is quite a bit. A lot of it is minor stuff. But first off, what happened between the last show and this show? I'll go to the PW Torch. They wrote, the Donald Trump character on Raw this week was played by longtime Midwest indie wrestler and ROH regular over the years, Ace Steel.
I think we all remember that very vividly, don't we?
It was the Ace Steel's Donald Trump with Rosie O'Donnell. Remember back in the days when the biggest controversy surrounding Donald Trump was he said something mean about Rosie O'Donnell?
Yeah, so like, kid, seriously, think about this. In 2007, right before Donald Trump was going to basically be the biggest draw in WWE history for WrestleMania 23, he was in the press while being the host of The Apprentice for getting into a war of words with Rosie O'Donnell, and that was all we had to worry about with Donald Trump.
And WWE decided to have wrestlers play them in a segment, and Ace Steel got to be Donald Trump. So
yeah, I haven't watched that segment since 2007, but I'm gonna guess that it's extremely offensive. I don't know what makes me think that. I don't know why I feel that way. It feels like it just might be the case. I don't know.
Well, you know who it all worked out for, Matt, is Ace Steel, because we'll go to the PW Insider, who writes, former ROH regular Ace Steel, who was offered and accepted a WWE developmental deal last week, is expected to be assigned to Deep South Wrestling. So that also happened in this month period. I don't know if this came before or after the Donald Trump thing, but yeah, Ace Steel is gone from Ring of Honor. No big farewell for him. Obviously, he wouldn't have probably merited a giant farewell because he was only sporadically used. But yeah, it's not a long-lived developmental tenure for Ace Steel, but he does spend some time there.
Yeah, I guess during that period, he doesn't really do much of note, but I guess there is a moment in 2007 where CM Punk, Colt Cabana, and Ace Steel are all under WWE contract in one form or another.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll get a chance to all be together again one day in heaven.
Yeah, I was going to say, geez, that's morbid, man.
Next, we'll go to the PW Torch. I thought this was just a little interesting bit at the very end of this thing. So, PW Torch wrote, ROH owner Kerry Silkin told the Monday Night Mayhem radio show that Bryan Danielson won't be back in ROH until May at the earliest. He said Danielson is rehabbing his shoulder. Then he will be on a tour of Japan in April. Here comes the interesting part. He also said ROH and TNA have a, quote, good relationship currently, unquote, and they will continue to feature wrestlers who will also appear in TNA on their 2007 shows. So if I could play it, if we had an ominous music sound drop, because yeah, it does. That relationship ends relatively soon.
Well, okay, so I'm actually curious about this because I know the TNA pulls their wrestlers from ROH, obviously, in the not too distant future, but I was not completely clear on if that moment was acrimonious the way it was in 2004, or if it was just like a, kind of a pragmatic business decision, like, well, you're on pay-per-view now, we're competitors now, and there's a little bit of like amicability between the two of them. So I don't necessarily think that them pulling their wrestlers indicates that the two companies have a bad relationship, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It certainly was not near in any way. We'll get to more of it when we get to that story when it happens, but like certainly not ugly in the way the 2004 split was, but I mean, nothing could be as ugly as the way that went down.
And by the way, the word I am looking for was, in fact, amicability.
You learn something I knew every day. I learned something about dogs before the show that we won't talk about, and now I've learned something about words before during the show. So Matt, you always educate me, Matt. But going to PW Insider next for a little tidbit. They just wrote, there are no plans for a Jim Cornette return on the horizon, but it will likely happen eventually. Again, if I had an ominous music sound drop, pressing it here.
Yeah, if we thought this last run was bad.
Now we'll go to PW Insider for a different story. They actually had kind of a lightning round of tidbits here. They first started off with, the general feeling is that Brent Albright will eventually get a second offer from World Wrestling Entertainment when they find an angle for him. Chris Benoit, Dave Finlay, and Ricky Steamboat are among his biggest supporters, and Steamboat has been watching his progress since his ROH debut. In fact, some speculate that unofficially, WWE agents point guys like Albright in the direction of Ring of Honor because they know they can't help but elevate their game there. So I think that's interesting on a couple points. One, like Brent Albright never does go back to WWE, even with him having so many champions there, although he'll lose one champion in 2007, not to be too morbid. And it's also interesting that, Ricky Steamboat's kind of keeping tabs on him in Ring of Honor. And also, I think this is one of the earlier instances I've read, and this is something that would happen more often, I think, in the coming years, of WWE kind of being in this position of guys where it's like, we're releasing you, we're still going to keep an eye on you. Why don't you go to these indies? Like, this might help you. Like, I think the best example of that would be Drew McIntyre, right? Like, got released, but Drew McIntyre had, like, a giant chip on his shoulder in the best possible way and worked his ass off in TNA and in indies all over the place and came back, and it's like the best case scenario for that kind of stuff. But, this is one of the early examples of them, I think, basically saying like, hey, why don't you go there? Maybe learn a couple extra moves or something. I don't know. Who knows?
I'm sure that's exactly what they said. Learn a couple extra moves. We cannot teach you these moves.
Your charisma game on point. Your body maybe needs a little work and learn a couple extra moves. And you know where you can do that? Ring of Honor.
Exactly.
Next, the PW Insider also added, Jushin Liger is once again back in the Ring of Honor site for international names they might want back in the future. Last time Liger was in the United States, ROH tried to work out a deal, but it fell through. So Liger, we do not see come back. It would have been interesting to see what they would have – if they got him for an extra – let's say in 2006 they got him for another double shot – I wonder who they would have tried to match him up with in 2006. It's interesting to think, because obviously they went heavy in the Danielson route on the one time they got him.
There's always Aries, he's always a go-to guy in situations like that. I feel like that probably would have happened.
And then speaking of another close call, another big name Ring of Honor could have had, PW Insider also goes and says D'Lo Brown is another name being considered by Ring of Honor for a few shows that could turn into full-time appearances if it worked out. Not only does it not work out, D'Lo doesn't even get to do one show with Ring of Honor. So D'Lo Brown.
D'Lo never works for Ring of Honor? I thought he did eventually.
Let me do some cage match looking, but how do you think D'Lo Brown would have done at this period?
I think when he was there later, unless my brain is playing tricks on me, I don't remember him making much of an impression. So I guess, it would have depended on what he did. I remember enjoying him during his peak in WWE. But yeah, he didn't strike me as a 2007 Ring of Honor type of guy. But who knows?
Here's how bad my memory is, man. Also, maybe how I don't know this era. You were like, oh, he worked in Ring of Honor. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. He worked 16 matches in 2009 Ring of Honor. So
yeah, I thought so. 2009. I don't remember. I think he did all right, but I don't think he was like a highlight of the company that year.
Yeah, it looks like, wrestling Colt Cabana, Frankie the Mobster, as one would, Roderick Strong, Brent Albright, Jay Briscoe, Nigel McGuinness for the world title. That'd be interesting. Anyway, so yeah, he will come in eventually, but not in the Gabe Sapolsky era. Another PW Insider, just killing it with the Ring of Honor news here. Mike Johnson wrote, there are currently no plans for Ring of Honor to break into new markets at this time. Instead, the current internal strategy for 2007 is to continue to build and grow crowds in their current markets. Expect ROH to heavily promote that they have sold out their first two live events at New York City's Manhattan Center as a play on the way that the WWE, or he's saying WWF because I guess that's the era he was referencing, used to push sellouts at Madison Square Garden when that building was the center of their promotional universe. ROH returns to the venue Friday, February 16th. The storylines of ROH's sister promotion Full Impact Pro will more closely follow ROH's storylines in 2007, but will still remain a distinctly different product. The FIP title will be used as something of a secondary belt within ROH as a way to help push the FIP DVDs into the ROH synergy. Several FIP titles are scheduled to be released nationally via retail by Big Vision Entertainment. I forget if that actually, I guess it happened, but it's interesting. It's funny to think of like FIP being in like retail stores, like at your local HMV.
But not ROH, right? Like ROH was not releasing DVDs that way, but FIP
Didn't
was.
Ring of Honor get at least a couple DVDs with Big Vision in like retail stores?
But like not from this era. Like, and when they did start putting out commercial DVDs again, they were compilations.
Yeah,
and maybe the pay-per-views they put out commercially, but like it's not like you could get ROH dedicated at a retail store.
Yeah, and going to the other part of the story, I do feel like we're kind of like cresting. If 2006 in some ways was like the peak for Ring of Honor, we're kind of seeing signs of like 2005, 2006, they're really expanding. They're running more shows into a lot of markets. This year, they run just a few shows fewer than 2006. And, you hear them saying, like, we're not expanding to any more markets. We're going to focus on the ones we have. So, they've kind of reached a peak. And
certainly not reflective of what the major wrestling companies in America are doing in 2024.
And ironically, there will be a new market they go to for a double shot in 2007 through a weird opportunity on the West Coast, and it goes about
Actually, Trevor, yeah, two new markets because yes, you said the West Coast, and maybe I interrupted you, but somewhere else as well.
Oh yeah,
like a really new market.
And then we go to the Observer News, and this is very tangentially related to Ring of Honor, but I've been kind of keeping up with I thought one interesting thing for Through the Years listeners would be to kind of listen to the CM Punk saga of how hard it was for him to kind of get over the stigma people had for indie wrestling, and how, like, we have some younger listeners, Matt. Like, we had a listener, I believe, between the last episode and this episode that talked to me briefly and mentioned like that they could not make me feel older, Matt. They mentioned that when they were when they were listening to the show, watching the shows, and when these shows originally happened, they were 3. And I just wanted to crawl into a coffin and close the lid.
I mean,
but
I bet you we have a couple people listening that are even younger than that. So
I know we have some listeners that are pretty young. So
yeah, and when you first said the CM Punk saga, I was like, that is way too vague, man.
He's had a number of sagas. Homer should have written something about him and not Simpson. But no, I think it's interesting just to kind of let people who did not live with this era know just how many stories like this happened that Punk somehow, like why people like you and me, Matt, at the time were kind of like amazed that Punk made it as big as he did. Like, we always knew he had the talent, but like so many stories like this happened, and we've read a few, but here's another one. So this is from the WWE news section of The Observer. CM Punk's push is now said to be completely dead as he got even more heat on him this past week. There were complaints to management about his attitude in the locker room, claiming he acts like he's a main event, and they perceive him as talking down to younger wrestlers.
I've never heard anything like this before. Completely unique story that we're hearing right here.
The SmackDown vets are of the opinion that who is he to act like he's a star when he's never proven anything? This is not uncommon for people who have had success elsewhere to garner that rep in WWE. In WWE, the perception is you are nothing unless you have proven it in WWE, unless you are someone like a Ric Flair. This was a problem a lot of the ex-WCW and ECW talent had early on because they thought they were stars. And in WWE, the existing wrestlers who were mid-card perceived mid-card WWE means more than a push in WCW. So who are you? So you can imagine what Punk as a star in Ring of Honor is going to mean. One SmackDown wrestler noted that almost nobody likes him. If he was a top guy like Kevin Nash saying the exact same things in the exact same way, everyone he does with his quick wit in the dressing room would be considered cool. But with the caste system, his sarcastic wit is taken negatively. The feeling is he acts respectful, but in a funny way. In that people think it's not the words he said, which don't sound bad at all when they're repeated, but how people take his words. The Maria thing does him no favors. There's a feeling he won't be cut because it would be an embarrassment if TNA brings him in and he becomes a star with them. So, man,
so hold on. I gotta say, I mean, I know people have mixed opinions about CM Punk. I'm completely on his side on this one. It's like it's such a stupid mentality. I think that probably there's some degree that mentality still exists there to a point, right? But like, I feel like it has to have gotten at least a little bit better in the past 17 years.
Oh, I think it's much bigger. Like, when someone like AJ Styles even years ago got, a fairly good push right off the bat coming in from TNA in New Japan, you didn't hear anything like this, like, AJ Styles hadn't earned it.
Well, but this is also about like Punk's behavior and his attitude. And I'm not sure that I don't know that Styles would act like that. But even if the point is, even Punk acting like that, it's like if you can act like that when you're Kevin Nash, you should be able to act like that when you're CM Punk because, they're I don't know if someone is funny and witty, they're funny and witty, and you shouldn't be like, oh, you're not allowed to be cool because you haven't earned your cool stripes yet. Like you just have to have what do they want people to do? Just have like no personality at all in the backstage area until they've wrestled in WWE for X amount of years? What are they looking for?
I think they really just want to you to be very, very quiet and
very,
humble,
very
and
demure, and just like yes sir, no sir.
It's
like what kind of lame life is that? That's so stupid.
Drink whatever JBL puts in front of you and eat all the egg whites Chris Benoit forces you to eat, and after a few years, you will be accepted. But
and if CM Punk just kept his head down and followed that strategy, he would only have to eat Chris Benoit egg whites for like 6 more months.
Folks, 2007 will be the year of Chris Benoit jokes. Enjoy it while it lasts.
Really, no, but honestly, like, we're gonna have to talk about that. I do not plan on making a lot of jokes about that situation. It's pretty horrible. I don't know if you heard about it, Trevor. But when you finally hear about it for the first time, you're going to agree with me that it was not a good situation.
Yeah, people have told me, like, don't spoil yourself on it. So, I was in a coma for 2007, and I'm just slowly reading the newsletter. So I'm expecting. I just assumed he took a long vacation that he hasn't returned from. So,
you could say that.
That's what we all in life. We all eventually take a long vacation we don't return from. But so for people wondering, we've talked about before on the show, but if you're wondering what Dave meant when he said the Maria thing does him no favors, again, we talk about another lovely relic of WWE mindset back then, the idea of you dating a woman that's considered like out of your league or too hot for you also would bring you resentment in WWE back in the day. And
I think that's a very, like, just based on everything, I think that's a complete Vince McMahon only kind of thing, right? Like, just Vince resents you, so everyone else has to also. And, maybe, like, I don't know, I don't want to cast aspersions, but, fuck them. Maybe Kevin Dunn also has that attitude. I don't know. But, like, I feel like with Vince gone, that attitude is probably mostly gone. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm not wrong, though.
I hope so. Because, again, Punk was not the only person that ever suffered through that either. I think I vaguely recall even a few rumblings of, like, Bryan Danielson when he started dating Brie Bell. Like, what's this nerd getting to
literally, did you watch how they booked Bryan Danielson?
I guess there was more rumors. I was thinking, I wonder if less subtext and more text in bold underlined on the screen. Yeah, you're right, man.
It's funny when, like, there is So, we'll have chances to talk about Bryan Danielson coming up very soon. But I just as an aside, there was a music video played on a recently aired episode of AEW Dynamite as a tribute to Bryan Danielson's career. And a lot of people were predictably like, well, this is a shitty video if it doesn't include the WWE parts of his career. And, if you think back to, like, the first 2 to 3 years of his WWE career, boy, you wouldn't really want to put that in a video kind of honoring him, because they kind of mercilessly mocked him in a absurd kind of way when you think about that. It's fucking Bryan Danielson. But anyway, yeah, I just had to mention that based on everything we're talking about.
Did you see the tweet someone posted? Oh, sorry for interrupting, but I was just going to say, did you see the tweet someone posted where they were like, how petty is it of AEW not to include any WWE footage in that music video? It's like, man, you don't know how this works. I'm sure they would have been happy to, but that you don't know how this works. But
yeah, it's very bizarre, but, like, it just reminds me, like, how much kicking and screaming Bryan Danielson had to drag that company into treating him with even a slight amount of respect, even after he was the most popular person in the company. It's like I said, I'll save it for later.
And I guess we got so much to get to, but the last thing I just wanted to note here, this was another real sign of the times. That last line, there is a feeling he won't be cut, Punk, that is, because it would be an embarrassment if TNA brings him in and he becomes a star with him. This was something we also saw back then that always, as a fan, infuriated me. The idea of, we don't see enough to push this guy, but we also don't want to release him because we're worried he could be a star somewhere else. Like, that is the most insane crackpot, just dead-brained logic that was really, when I think of, like, WWE's, like, their mindset in this era, I think of that kind of thinking as much as anything. This idea of, like, well, we're against Punk, but we can't release him because what if someone else uses him?
Good thing we live in the modern era where a very benevolent Tony Khan, out of the goodness of his heart, decided to release CM Punk from his contract so he could go be a star in WWE. That's what happened, right?
Exactly. And meanwhile, in this month, maybe some people, like, hopefully you were hoping Gabe Sapolsky rested. Not everyone in Ring of Honor was resting. Some people were working in the month off. Go to the PW Torch. The Briscoes will make their first tour of Noah in January. Nigel McGuinness, who has toured with Noah previously, will also be on the tour. The Briscoes and McGuinness will not miss any ROH dates in January, as Noah's tours do not conflict with ROH's dates. And then Torch would follow up later, writing, the Briscoes defeated Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Takashi Sugiura to capture Noah's GHC Junior Heavyweight Tag Team titles. ROH management is hinting at the possibility that the Briscoes may defend their titles in ROH, and that would not happen because we'll go to the Observer Noah section at this month. Dave wrote, one of the most notable things about the current booking for Noah is the obvious respect Noah has for ROH. On the last tour of the year, when Bryan Danielson debuted, while he didn't bring his belt to the ring, because I think Bryan just didn't want to bring his belt, and they didn't push him as ROH champion, he was only asked to do one job all tour, and that was a singles match with Kenta. The Kenta versus Danielson program was over pretty big among the fans at many of the cities, off them airing Danielson's September 16th win over Kenta in Ring of Honor on the Noah TV show. On this tour, Mark and Jay Briscoe, in their debuts, have won every match, including the January 14th show at Hakata Star Lanes in Fukuoka, defeating Naomichi Marufuji and Go Shiozaki. In old-school Japanese booking, foreign junior heavyweights would have to lose to Japanese heavyweights. Not that Marufuji is heavyweight, but they've beaten heavies on this tour. And then the Torch would add, Jay and Mark Briscoe lost the GHC junior tag titles to Kotaro Suzuki and Ricky Marvin in 27 minutes at the Budokan show. So, yeah, this was a kind of a, it was the Briscoes' first tour of Noah. And I think on the first night in, or one of the early nights in, they give him the GHC junior tag titles. They let him have them for the whole tour. And then at the end of the tour, they had him drop them. So, yeah, like this is the time where in the next few months, it feels like this is like the strongest probably, 2007 is the year of the ultra strong Noah ROH relationship. And you're seeing that, like, as Dave pointed out, not just in how, ROH would book Noah guys very strong in ROH, but Noah was kind of doing some of the same on the other end.
Yeah, they weren't having the main event so much, but they were put in good positions, allowed to have major matches and win. Yeah, it's a big deal.
And then our last minor story before we get to a big event. The Observer wrote this. This was in January 29th issue. This was about, a big fleet of WWE releases that happened at this time, as WWE would do from time to time, where they just do these giant clusters. I mean, what am I saying in the past tense? They still do that occasionally. But Dave wrote, I'm not going to go down all the wrestlers they released, but Dave wrote about the only wrestler ROH seems to have interest in from the list is Doug Basham. And this is another guy again, maybe my memory's off. I don't think ROH ever uses Doug Basham. But
Pretty sure you're right about Doug Basham. I'm pretty sure.
Thank God for the stat checking of Matt Feuerstein. But by that, I just mean hopefully your memory is better than mine. But that gets us to why this show is called Dedicated, and a big thing, the biggest thing that happened in Ring of Honor's timeline between the last show and the show, and that would be the passing away of co-founder of Ring of Honor, Doug Gentry. So looking up Doug Gentry, he was a guy, it was part of his legacy. He didn't mind, and we'll get to people acknowledging this, he did not mind not getting the credit. He liked being kind of in the background and helping other people. And it's hard to find a lot about Doug Gentry. I did find a fair bit, but a lot of times when I find stuff, I find a bunch of stuff and then I edit it down. I'm going to do right by Doug here, because I feel like he is a guy that has not gotten enough attention. And but like this is most of what I found, because not a lot of people online, talk about him. We can talk about that in a bit, why he maybe did not get as much credit, but we got a couple long pieces from Dave Meltzer in The Observer, a couple long pieces from Mike Johnson, and a few assorted little things. And I'm going to read them in full because I think there's not much I really would have wanted to edit out. And I think, these are like the most writing and the best writing that was kind of written about Doug at this time. So it's the best tribute we can pay to him, is really kind of giving it a spotlight for people that did not see it at the time. So we'll start with The Observer. This was before Doug passed, but we were getting some signs of what could come, tragically. Dave writes, Doug Gentry, who was the former owner on paper of ROH after Rob Feinstein and before Kerry Silkin bought everyone out, has been hospitalized this past week due to a heart valve infection. He had been losing weight and lethargic for some time, but refused to go to the doctor. There's a lesson in this, because there is a mentality in guys to tough it out to tough it out when you aren't feeling good. Believe me, that same mentality almost killed me in 1993. Gentry still works for Feinstein in RF Video and was pretty much ordered to see a doctor, and they found the infection. He first has to rid the body of the infection, and then we'll have to get an operation for a replacement heart valve. The replacement heart valves only work for a certain length of time, so every decade or so he's going to have to undergo surgery to get a new replacement valve. The doctor told him that if he didn't get checked out or get the operation done, there was a 95% chance he would have been dead within 3 months. Obviously, this goes bad. I'll just mention it's a minor detail, but if you're wondering what Dave's referencing about how, something could have happened to him in 93, there's a famous story where Dave had really bad, stomach pains before he was – I forget the exact details of the story, but it was something to the effect of Dave was really feeling bad. He was scheduled to be about to go to, I believe a trip to Japan, one of his wrestling trips he would take in the nights where he'd see a bunch of shows and stuff. And he was almost wanting to get on the plane anyway, and for some reason he decided not to, or maybe the health got so bad it forced him away from it. And basically he was sick and lay up in the hospital for over a week. He nearly died, appendix problems or whatever.
Yeah, and he had really, really bad appendicitis. And I remember him saying when he back in the day on Observer Live, after his doctor removed his appendix, he was like he said the doctor was like white as a ghost and was like, if we had waited even slightly longer, you'd have been a goner because your appendix would have burst.
Yeah, and so Dave has always said, if I got on that plane, I would have died because I would have been probably over the ocean on the way to Japan, no quick way to land, and this appendix would have exploded and I would have died probably. So, Dave obviously taking to heart the idea of if you are sick, do not tough it out. Go run to a doctor. Do not ignore it. And we will go to the follow-up now. This is also the Observer and Dave Meltzer. Dave wrote, Doug Gentry, one of the key people involved in the starting up of the Ring of Honor promotion, passed away on January 26th after 2 heart attacks. He was 34. Gentry was a lifelong wrestling fan who was Rob Feinstein's best friend and roommate dating back to when both were students at Temple University, whose last thoughts were no doubt pro wrestling. When he was taken by ambulance to the hospital the night before his death, he was chanting Onita, Onita from an FMW Big Show where he remembered fans chanting Onita vociferously as Atsushi Onita was being taken to the hospital in an ambulance.
It's kind of humorous, but so sad when you think about it.
It gets sadder because the night before that, apparently sensing something, Doug watched DVDs of 80s wrestling all night, saying he was afraid to go to sleep, and made jokes about dreaming he had just seen Andre the Giant dressed up like a hooker. He was even joking in a dark manner about how his death would be covered in The Observer. Feinstein and Gentry met in 1987 as tape traders through mutual friend Eric Gargiulo, who was friends with Gentry dating back to 9th grade at Archbishop Ryan High School in Philadelphia, when he saw a copy of Pro Wrestling Illustrated on Gentry's desk at a time and place when it wasn't exactly considered cool at that age to be a pro wrestling fan. Feinstein didn't have cable, so Gentry would tape the NWA wrestling matches on TBS for him. Feinstein would give Gentry in return tapes of matches from Japan that he'd read about in The Observer. When Feinstein's tape business got bigger, Feinstein talked Gentry into quitting college in 1992 and working full-time for RF Video, driving Feinstein to shows all over the country. Over Christmas of 2001, after ECW and WCW folded, and upon seeing the King of Indies tape of a 2-night tournament Roland Alexander put on in Vallejo, California, the two of them saw the talent in the show, like Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe, Low Key, Doug Williams, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Spanky, and felt they could run a promotion with those wrestlers as the nucleus, presenting the best matches possible with the idea of catering to the hardcore fans, making money on selling videotapes to make up for the hole left by the closing of ECW. Gabe Sapolsky, who worked with both of them at RF Video after ECW folded, was then approached with the idea and ended up as booker, although Gentry, who was very creative when it came to ideas, helped a lot in the first few years.
I know it's a serious topic,
yeah, go on.
But can I just kind of question the phrasing, very creative when it came to ideas? Because, isn't kind of redundant, I don't know. Feels
yeah, no, that is a good point. By nature, if you have ideas, I guess you could have if I just had all my ideas were ideas I heard from somebody else.
No, if you're creative, it probably means you have ideas, right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And Matt, any times you want to interject with levity, we could use some levity here. Later, Dave continues, later in 2003, when Feinstein was going broke because the ROH idea was initially a big money loser, it was Gentry, a longtime friend of Kerry Silkin, a well-off ticket broker who was an ROH fan, who got Silkin to keep the company afloat. Eventually, after the scandal where Feinstein was caught in a sting operation by the Perverted Justice website when he responded via email and a later meeting with someone posing as an underage boy, Feinstein transferred all his stock to Gentry, who became on-paper president of both ROH and RF Video. Gentry, who was straight, moved out of good for Dave mentioning that. Okay, Dave. Moved out of Feinstein's house and back with his mother, but a few months later moved back with Feinstein. Silkin and Gabe Sapolsky freaked out, afraid that if the news got out, the company's credibility would be shot since they had publicly stated Feinstein had nothing to do with the company any longer. Just before things went down in 2004, Feinstein owned 55% of ROH and Silkin owned 45%. There was a showdown where Silkin threatened to pull out funding the group unless those percentages were reversed. So at the time of the controversy, Silkin was actually 55% owner, but largely a silent partner, with Gentry having on-paper control of the company. Gentry moving back in with Feinstein forced a showdown where Silkin felt the company had to completely divest itself of any connection with Feinstein, which meant buying the company outright and leaving Gentry out in the cold. Feinstein and Gentry, after their non-compete clause expired in the sale, on several occasions tried to start up their own independent group, but the stigma of Feinstein's bust made it impossible to get any momentum and forced them to have to use other people as the public faces of the company. None of the companies ever got any traction as ROH, which in 2005 gained enough of a following that it became profitable. Dear God, Dave, Dave keeps getting fooled on this. But anyway, was already the established brand for the market they were catering to. It was eerie at the January 26th ROH show in Braintree, Massachusetts, just hours after Gentry's death, because it was the building where in 2004, just before the sting operation, that Sapolsky, Feinstein, and Gentry had their last show with all three working together. Even though his departure from the company was not on good terms, they did a 10-bell salute. It was almost a spooky night for Sapolsky, who hadn't talked with Gentry since right after the split. Sapolsky basically grew up in the business with both of them. For most of the life of ECW and until 2004, he worked with them, traveled with both of them to all the shows, and went full-time with RF Video when ECW folded. At one point during the show, Homicide looked right into the camera and said, "This one's for you, Doug." Gentry had been ill for some time with a heart infection, and he didn't take care of himself. He never saw the dentist, resulting in problems where he lost teeth. He had drug issues, had been losing weight, and had been lethargic for months. He had been refusing to see a doctor, even after Feinstein forced him to see a doctor who diagnosed his condition as a serious heart infection that was life-threatening. He would miss appointments for his antibiotics, as the nurse who came to see him every other day noted he had missed getting some IV bags in recent weeks. After his death, Feinstein found a letter from the original doctor who discovered the infection addressed to him, asking why he wasn't returning phone calls. He was going to need surgery very soon for a replacement heart valve, or he wasn't expected to survive another 3 months. He was hospitalized for a week and was discharged and did well for a week back home. He went with Feinstein to shoot an interview with Raven and Honky Tonk Man, but he got exhausted just going from the car to their hotel room. He looked pale on January 24th, but wouldn't go to the hospital until Feinstein forced him to go. His vital signs looked bad, but the doctors discharged him, which in hindsight seems like a bad mistake, and labeled it an anxiety attack, and he went home to watch 80s tapes. He threw up the next afternoon, and his health got worse as the day went on. At 9 p.m., he was screaming in pain and gasping for air when an ambulance was called. He was coherent, and doctors who at first feared a stroke after a CAT scan ruled he had pneumonia. They wanted him to take sleeping pills and go get to sleep, but he refused to take them as he feared going to sleep and not waking up. He watched TV and tried to fight sleeping until going into cardiac arrest at 3 a.m. and being put on life support. He also may have suffered a stroke. He suffered a second heart attack at about 9 a.m. and died almost immediately from it. Gentry did get to live his dream. He went to Japan and saw pro wrestling live in 1996, including FMW and the tournament for the J Crown and G1 Climax tournament that year. He went to Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and all over the U.S. for wrestling and was around for ECW from its start until its finish, as well as the early years of ROH. He loved wrestling and going to shows around the world and learning the business. In some ways, he was victimized by being so tight with Feinstein that when the heat went down, he always backed Feinstein, even when it would have been better for him not to. There was bitterness when ROH took off, and he was the one who had the connection to Silkin and got him involved to fund the promotion. Yet, by backing Feinstein, who he would insist was the one who got screwed because he started the company, he felt they turned against him. It wasn't so much of an issue that Gentry chose Feinstein over ROH when everyone had to make a choice of which side they were on, as much as Gentry and Feinstein were so close there was no choice to make. Gentry never fully acknowledged that at the time. It was very questionable if ROH could have survived things going back to how they were, because they had enough enemies and local promoters could use the tape of the Feinstein sting to get them kicked out of a lot of arenas. The one thing I'd like to say is that Gentry was every bit as nice a guy as people have been saying. He was very different in that he was someone who didn't want or need to take credit for something being successful as long as it was successful. So, yeah, that's the initial
I'm glad that Dave gave him that article, because that wasn't automatic, that he would get that level of write-up. And also I was thinking, has Dave ever, does he ever have that level of detail on the medical minute by minute that led to someone's death? That was so detailed. Obviously, it must have been from talking to Rob. I don't know if he's talking to Rob Feinstein. I don't know who he talked to, but obviously someone with very intimate knowledge of what happened to Doug. It's that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, it is harrowing, and part of me was almost, when I was looking, I was like, should I edit some of this up? But I thought, there's a few things, researching Doug that you get, and one is that this was a guy who lived and breathed wrestling, and I think the idea that, what you get from that play-by-play is just how, he's watching wrestling tapes as he's in, his final days. He's making wrestling jokes. He's joking about how he'll be covered if he dies in The Observer. This was a guy that even in his darkest hours, he was kind of turning to wrestling for comfort and levity. From all accounts, this was a guy who just this was his life, pro wrestling. And I think that description of his final days really gets that across. And I guess we'll keep getting to it. But what Dave says there, this is almost more amazing considering that who his best friend was, Rob Feinstein, who a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about. But I couldn't find anyone saying anything negative about Doug except maybe that he's friends with, that he picked a bad best friend, which is pretty amazing in pro wrestling. That you can't find a ton of people talking about Doug, but the people I have found, even people that hate Rob, were Doug was a good guy.
I mean,
that's pretty rare.
I guess probably one of the things you could say maybe is that he was loyal to a fault. Which, that's sometimes is a quality people have, but he definitely was loyal. You could say that. And yeah, and you're right that it was very weird that that Dave Meltzer wanted to mention that Doug was straight. I think the reason that he said it was to, kind of indicate that even though Doug and Rob lived together, they weren't romantically involved, but I feel like he could have just said that and not had the weird, just so you know, he's straight, not like this other guy, that's kind of strange. But yeah, I am, but also I'm glad that Meltzer included that level of detail, because I think it can be a cautionary tale for people. I know that a lot of people say that that not taking care of your teeth can put your heart in danger. I don't know that that's what happened with Doug Gentry, but it is something, when you hear he never went to the dentist and then he ended up with a heart valve infection and died after having 2 heart attacks. It is something to make mention of, people take care of your dental health to the best that you can.
Yeah, that's a great point. Some people might not know that, but yeah, that's absolutely true. There is documented connections between oral health and your heart health. If you let bacteria grow there, it can really affect your heart. And obviously, I guess the other thing would be, which Dave didn't really dwell on, but he did mention, the drug use, I'm sure, did his heart no favors. And yeah, the big lesson would also be, like we just mentioned earlier, don't ignore things. As tragic as it is, you wonder what would have happened if he did not skip some of his antibiotics, if he did not fight sleep when he was stressed out, when the doctors were trying to tell them, you need to get some rest. If, as hard as I imagine it would have been for him to go to sleep, if he, when you're in your 30s or in your 20s, you feel invincible. And as you get a little older, you start realizing you're not so invincible. And
unless you're me, in which case you certainly never felt invincible and were always extremely neurotic. But for a lot of young people, I do believe that's true. The other thing I'll say is there are certain people in the history of any industry that are just unsung influencers, even before, I guess influencer was not a term at that point, but unsung influential people. And I think we can clearly say Doug Gentry was a very influential person, just by virtue of starting Ring of Honor. Obviously, Gabe Sapolsky gets a lot of credit, and I'm sure, completely deserved. But Doug Gentry was, as Dave Meltzer said, very creative when it comes to ideas, and so I'm sure he played a big role. And I think that any listener of this podcast knows how influential this era of Ring of Honor was on modern wrestling for both good and bad reasons. So I think that it's important that we acknowledge Doug Gentry as a very, pretty important figure, honestly, in the history of 21st century American wrestling. And the other thing I'll mention, as I did back when we covered shows that he was the commentator Ray Murrow on, is one of my all-time favorite Philadelphia accents is held by one Doug Gentry. So I will always fondly remember listening to Ray Murrow on commentary and that beautiful accent.
The clarion was always flowing, Matt, when Ray Murrow was involved. And so next we'll go to, I was listening to an honorable mention, their episode on this show we're going to cover today. And we will get to the show, but this is kind of a special thing dedicated. And Shane Hagedorn mentioned about kind of Doug in general and like things that were happening that day, discovering that day that Doug had passed away. I think Shane said like they learned, I think, or at least he did at the show. So this is Shane Hagedorn from the Honorable Mention podcast, which if you took a drink every time we plugged it, you'd be dead of alcohol poisoning, but you should listen in. So Shane says, nothing but good things to say about Doug from my personal interactions with him, and I think that goes for damn near everybody, especially from those earliest days of Ring of Honor and the Indies. It wasn't just Ring of Honor. It wasn't just ECW. He was everywhere. ECWA, Jersey All-Pro, ICW, Puerto Rico. He was all over the place. Lots of connections, lots of people whose lives were touched by Doug. He filmed the early shows, edited for the first year and a half, almost nearly the first 2 years. I think the last show he edited may have been War of the Wire or The Conclusion, something like that. I think after that it all went down to Florida as far as the events editing in. I think in the aftermath of the split, his importance got downplayed a lot by the people who were there in the beginning. I think there were people who responded in a very fucked up way when they found out the news of Doug's passing. I don't know if joy is the right word, but it's the first one that pops to mind. It was weird. It was fucked up how some people responded. And this is the one I told Matt before. This was going to be overall a positive thing. This is the one bit of negativity, and we go into another quote from. This is from the Declaration of Independence website in an article that came months down the line, where after a Ring of Honor photographer Mary Kate got fired from the company, which happens months after this for different claimed reasons, but. I just will first mention it for those who don't know. We've referenced them maybe once or twice before on the show. Declaration of Independence was a website covering the Indies that was spicy, to say it to be the kindest, or inflammatory and shoddy, and to be taken with a big grain of salt at worst. But they would sometimes have gossip and stuff. They were very much in the bag for Rob Feinstein after the split, very against Gabe Sapolsky. But this is a quote they wrote about this scenario, and I thought I'd mention it because it is interesting. This is from the DOI website. In January of this year, Mary Kate was also harassed after attending Doug Gentry's funeral from some of Ring of Honor's staff. The DOI did not print that story at the time, as we found it disrespectful to Doug's memory and did not want to cost Mary Kate any heat with ROH. One of the people who did not harass her over going to the funeral was Gabe Sapolsky, as it came from others in the ROH office. On this note, it should be said that Gabe Sapolsky actually reached out to Rob Feinstein during Doug's passing and expressed his condolences, despite never talking to Doug again when Doug left ROH in 2004. And I thought it was important to mention that, because if you hear this about, some people in Ring of Honor were pretty gross about Doug's passing, it sounds like Gabe Sapolsky was not one of those people. In fact, I have multiple examples of Gabe going out of his way in interviews years after the fact to bring up Doug and tell people, like, you're not giving Doug, like, people need to remember Doug. Like, it was not just me and Rob. In fact, I have a quote from a 2012 interview Gabe did with BleacherReport.com, where they just did some question about, like, when you and Rob started Ring of Honor, and Gabe actually interjects, like, in his answer and says, Doug Gentry needs to be mentioned alongside us as well. He was instrumental in getting everything started. And I know there was another quote, which has been lost to time, but I remember mentioning on an episode years ago on ThROH The Years, where I remember Voices of Wrestling once did a reader poll of the best wrestlers in Ring of of Honor history called the Honor Roll, and they also did a separate poll for the 50 best non-wrestlers. And Doug I think more people voted for the wrestlers than non-wrestlers, but I think probably 40 to 50 something people or more voted even just for the non-wrestlers. And Doug only finished 26th as most important non-wrestlers or best non-wrestlers in Ring of Honor history. Gabe finished first, and Doug was only actually on one ballot. He finished, who ranked him 8th, and that got him into the 26th overall. And I remember Gabe at the time, even though he was getting this, this recognition, wrote on the Voices of Wrestling message board that Doug should have been higher. He was more important to this. So the one thing I will say is when talking about this native thing, I think I want to be clear for people have lots of faults to say about Gabe and lots of positives, but I think Gabe has gone out of his way as much as anyone to try and keep Doug's importance alive in mentions where he did not have to. And I think whatever this stuff in these couple of quotes I've mentioned about negative things, I would be pretty confident saying Gabe was not one of the people that was joking about Doug's passing, which I would stake a lot of money on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, that Gabe did not feel happy about his old friend dying. I think that's pretty clear from just every bit of evidence that you could possibly point to.
And we got a couple of things we're going to end on with. Mike Johnson wrote a couple, I think, of the best pieces about him. But first, I thought we might as well give a note to Rob Feinstein, too, because Rob Feinstein was Doug's best friend and one of the guys he founded Ring of Honor with. And so I found this actually from legacy.com, which I guess is a website where you can leave kind of remembrances to people. And I read yesterday, almost 50 people posted remembrances to Doug, including people from the wrestling industry, like Lou D'Angeli, former sign guy Dudley, and other people. And again, nothing but glowing, obviously on a site like that, it's only going to be glowing things, but just the tone of people's remembrances and things it was just, you could tell how well-liked and friendly this guy was considered. And Rob had left this note, so I thought I'd give him a little bit of time and read this. Rob wrote, "I want this to be a dream and he wrote this, by the way, days after Doug's passing. "I want this to be a dream so bad. I miss you so much that words can't describe what I am feeling right now. You were the best person I have ever met in my entire life. There will never be another friend like you. You did more for me than anyone else that I have ever known. You put yourself out for me over yourself. I can't ever thank you enough for being my friend. I just want to be able to spend more time with you. No matter where we went together, it was always fun. I often told you that I could have been in a sealed room with you and I would still have had a blast. My life will never be the same again. Nobody will be able to replace you because you were one of a kind. I am not looking forward to anything anymore. I just can't picture what it's going to be like without you around. The last few days have been so empty. I can't wait to see you again. You will always be part of me and I will never forget you. I love you to death. Your best friend, Rob." So yeah, I mean, for whatever you want to say about Rob, I mean, that had to be a huge blow. I mean, I don't think anyone can deny that was his best friend. And yeah, that is harrowing, especially considering that he witnessed, I imagine, living with Doug, those harrowing final days. But we finally have a couple pieces from PW Insider. This is both written by Mike Johnson. This is what we'll end on. So the first one, Mike starts with, "I'm extremely sorry to report that Doug Gentry, a well-loved fixture of the Northeastern wrestling scene for well over the past decade and a major part of RF Video, ECW in the early days of Ring of Honor, passed away this morning. Gentry was the longtime best friend and business associate of Rob Feinstein of Pennsylvania's RF Video. For decades, the two were inseparable, as Gentry was considered Feinstein's closest confidant and most loyal employee. Gentry was a major part of RF Video's business relationship with Extreme Championship Wrestling, often traveling across the country to events to handle RF Video's vendor tables or filming events for the company's ECW fan cam releases. Gentry also quietly helped take care of international talent that came into the company, including Super Crazy Yoshihiro Tajiri and Masato Tanaka, among others. Gentry was actually the first person to suggest Crazy and Tajiri to ECW for jobs. So if you were a fan of either worker, Gentry helped them get their first national break in the United States. After ECW shuttered operations in 2001, Gentry and Feinstein began working with a number of Northeastern independent promotions while scouting talent. Gentry's work from scouting, creative, and production ends were an integral part in the birth and development of Ring of Honor. Gentry headed up the company's production and editing for its home video, and from the time of ROH's founding in 2002 to its eventual split from RF Video in 2004. The truth is, If it had not been for Gentry, Ring of Honor, as everyone knows it, simply would not exist today in any form. By March 2003, ROH had been in the red for some time, and things were looking bleak. Kerry Silkin, a friend of Gentry dating back a number of years, approached ROH about coming on board as an investor. Without a doubt, had Gentry not cultivated that business relationship, ROH would have been another independent that had a solid run only to fail. Had Gentry not known Silkin, ROH would have ceased to have existed following the Philadelphia event where Samoa Joe first won the Ring of Honor Championship from Xavier. In the wake of the NBC 10 Philadelphia incident involving Feinstein, Gentry was named the new president of RF Video and Ring of Honor, when Silkin, by then the majority owner of ROH, made moves to split ROH completely away from RF Video. Gentry stayed loyal to his longtime friend Feinstein. They immediately began working on rebuilding RF Video and cultivating relationships with numerous northeastern indie groups. Of late, Gentry had been working on different video projects for RF Video, as well as booking a number of independent wrestling companies, including Pro Wrestling Elite and Ronnie Lang's Pro Wrestling Explosion. I first met Gentry back in 1994 during the early days of NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling, and the one constant that never changed what came to him was that he was universally liked by everyone that came into contact with him. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that would have anything negative to say about him. He treated everyone with the same respect and was deeply well-liked by everyone that did business with him. Gentry was the most easygoing and mellow person you could ever hope to meet. At the same time, he was a friend that was fiercely loyal toward those he cared about. I once witnessed him tear across a Bayonne, New Jersey venue Jersey All Pro Wrestling was running after Feinstein was physically challenged by someone upset over RF Video selling a product they felt they had the exclusive video rights to use. The person in question flipped over Feinstein's table. Within 10 seconds, Gentry had run the entire distance of the venue with blood in his eyes. In the end, Gentry backed the person down. I'd like to express my deepest condolences to all of Doug Gentry's family and friends during this sad time. There's no word at this time on memorial services. And then clearly this was getting to Mike, because Mike then had him to write a second piece, and this is what we'll end this on. Mike wrote this: If I had to make a list of everyone in the world that deserved something bad to happen to them, Doug Gentry would have been at the very bottom of the list, even under myself. His passing last Friday, if nothing else, is proof to everyone that knew him, even slightly, that life is far too short and often unfair. I first met Gentry in 1994 during the early days of ECW. I had known Rob Feinstein and Eric Gargiulo for a while, often buying videos via the mail from what would later become RF Video. I can still remember buying my first FMW tape from Gargiulo at a Weekend of Champions event promoted by John Arezzi, and talking for a long time about metal band Faith No More. For years, I would often refer to Gargiulo, who later went on to become the voice of Combat Zone Wrestling, as Faith No More Dude. I've been racking my brain for the last 24 hours, but for the life of me, I can't remember or pinpoint when I first met Gentry. The closest I can recall is that it was absolutely at an ECW arena show, because, well, he was always there. Even during periods when Feinstein fell out with the company, Gentry was always there. He was that well liked that even when his closest friend was persona non grata, he still had free reign to come and go as he pleased with the company. Gentry was a rare soul, not just in professional wrestling, but in life, in that you'd be hard-pressed to ever say anything bad about him. He was always a mellow guy, no matter who you were or how many times you had met him, or even if you hadn't. Gentry was friendly and willing to talk wrestling. He was one of those people that you gravitated towards when you arrived at shows, even if just to say hello, because he was good people. He loved to talk wrestling in life. He was often the brunt of the jokes of his friends, but it never got him upset. He laughed it off and gave it right back. Gentry was someone who got to live a life doing something he truly loved. Everyone should be so lucky in their own lives. Unlike many others around professional wrestling, Gentry never felt bigger than the next person, never acted condescending towards anyone, and always came off like a good-hearted soul. I can remember sitting and BSing in many a bar with him when ECW was on the road. He was the epitome of the type of guy that everyone liked and wanted to get a drink for, because he would be the first person to remember that it was his turn to buy it back in the next city. I'm sure that if he could read this now, he'd wonder why everyone was making such a big deal over him. He was that humble. Behind the scenes, Gentry was a man of many hats. During the time periods where RF Video service wasn't so hot, chances are it was Gentry who was fixing your problems. He manned the RF Video booths at every show I can think of, unless he was filming ECW's fan cams instead of Gabe Sapolsky. When ECW closed, Gentry was often involved with getting promotions that RF Video worked with to improve, getting their talents to do promos to add to the video releases. It seemed like he was everywhere at once. I remember the night he was filming some crazy CZW main event in Smyrna, Delaware, where a light tube smashed his face and hand up at ringside. Despite being cut up, he just kept filming. I remember walking around backstage after the show. CZW's medical personnel were cleaning glass out of cuts and wiping down wounds for the CZW wrestlers that were in the main event. At the end of this line of bloody behemoths waiting for their turn to be looked at was Gentry, tiny in comparison, but busted open nonetheless, with dried blood on his face, waiting his turn. Like everyone else involved in the launch of the then fledgling promotion, Ring of Honor was Gentry's baby. I can still remember the first ROH event in Philly where he ran around with a handheld camera over his shoulder trying to document everything and get every promo done in time because they had to start on time in order to get off on the right foot with the fans. Gentry handled a lot of the editing of the earlier ROH shows and provided commentary under the name Ray Murrow. Even during the fallout between Ring of Honor and RF Video in 2004, I can't remember Gentry having a crossword to say about anyone. I know the entire situation broke his heart, but even then, he never badmouthed anyone. The lone time I ever saw Gentry get angry was when he got physically involved with someone who threatened Feinstein at a Jersey All-Pro Wrestling event. Even then, it wasn't because Gentry was like that. It was because he was loyal to the nth degree to those he cared about in his circle. There's been a lot written about Rob Feinstein the past several years, but one thing that I'll never forget is that in the end, Gentry stood by the person who was his best friend. He remained loyal to his dying breath. Whether you have personally agreed or understood Gentry's decisions or not, you can't help but respect someone with loyalty that pure. If everyone in their life had just one friend with the amount of deep loyalty that Gentry had for those he cared about, the world would be a far, far better place. Professional wrestling is a really strange and fickle business, often populated by those who only care about what you can do for them at this very moment. Gentry was a unique person in wrestling. He was the exact opposite. My deepest condolences to his family and his friends, especially Rob Feinstein and Eric Gargiulo, who, despite their ups and downs over many, many years, always had Gentry as the buffer to offset their differences. I can only hope that everyone who met Gentry through the years remembers him for the good person he was and tries to take a piece of his qualities and apply them to their own lives, myself included. We'd all be much better people in the long run. Of course, Doug Gentry would be too humble to agree with me. That's just how he was. God bless you, Doug, and your family. So, yeah, I thought that was, some of the best writing I've ever seen Mike Johnson write. That very touching. And I think that really, I didn't know he recommended Tajiri and Super Crazy, but we did know, I think, from the Mike Johnson thing, we referenced this on the At Our Best episode. So that was where we did an extra 3 hours on that show all about the Feinstein scandal. So if people want to learn about that, you can get to that. Or if you want to pay some money for an even more detailed one, I know I've been getting through it, the Between the Sheets with Dave Bixen's band and Chris Zellner's podcast did an entire series about it, even more detail, 3-part series. But yeah, I feel bad in a way that we don't have more concrete details on what Doug did for Ring of Honor, booking creative-wise. We know he did production, film, temporarily did commentary, but in a way it seems like that's part of Doug's legacy, right? Is that it's kind of fitting in some ways that because he seemed like a guy, he was completely happy with taking the back seat. He just wanted to be a part of things. He just wanted to help. And he was pretty humble in that respect, it seems like.
There are some aspects of that old style of ROH DVD production, especially late in the era before the whole Feinstein situation happened, that I actually like better than what they did subsequently. So I think he did have some good ideas when it came to production that didn't really stick. But obviously it was still in its infancy as well. So I'm sure he would have adapted as time went on. But yeah, like I said, just an unsung influential person in wrestling history. And I'm glad we got to, and also thank you, obviously, for reading so much of that. If you let me know if you need to arrest your voice, I'm happy to take the reins for a little while. But but yeah, I'm glad that we got to take some time out to give him his due. No matter what you think of, everything that went down leading to his departure from the company.
Yeah, and again, just remember, I think people should just remember, Ring of Honor, again, does not exist past middle of 2003 if it's not for Doug Gentry. So foundational piece of this company, even just for that and for nothing of the other things he did. But okay, finally, Matt, one last thing before we get to the show.
You tricked me. You said we were going to start the show next. I'm just kidding.
Well, there's a couple of things I've on the video wires between the last show and this one that I think are worth noting. The first one is somewhere on one of the video wires, somewhere backstage, Christopher Daniels finds Noah wrestler Muhammad Yone backstage, who was combing his incredible afro. And I guess he was just in there for probably the final battle, and they filmed it there. And
no, it was definitely a Glory by Honor, because that's when Yone was there.
Oh, yeah. Well, then they saved this clip for a while because Daniels is stunned by Yone's afro. He calls it glorious and says he heard stories about it. Daniels is just like freaking about his afro, and he goes, I used to have a lot of hair, but nothing like that. And I might still have kept my hair if it was like that. And Yone goes to Daniels, and he goes, I have a secret. And he just whispers to Daniels, women love. And Daniels says, I have a secret for you, Yone. And he goes, women also love bald heads. And then both men touch Christopher Daniels' head. And then Daniels walks away saying, what a pimp. I don't know why they did this, why they included this, but it does. Like, it just, what? It's worth watching. It's ridiculous.
Trevor, do women love bald heads? I feel like that's not typically the stereotype.
No, I like that Daniels acted like being bald for him was a choice, which I doubt it was. If I could grow a fro, I'd still have my hair. Yeah. But then, also more importantly on the video wires, more important than that, believe it or not, was between the last show and this one, was we got the debut of the third and final chapter of the Jimmy Jacobs music video trilogy with Kiss to Kill, Kiss numeral 2, Kill, no spaces. It is a complete tonal shift from the prior two songs. It opens with like a brief snippet of the Ballad of Lacey and the weird Jeremy Piven voiceover from the second Jimmy Jacobs music video before we launch into a much more dour, emo-licious music track with a chorus featuring screaming. And the whole video sees Jimmy in black, gothier attire that he's worn in the past. We get a shot of him applying eye makeup before he punches and shatters a mirror. We also get a shot that hints at something way off in the future, intentionally or unintentionally, where blood is dripping onto Jimmy's face from above. We also get shots of Jimmy smoking. He's bad, playing with his spike, pushing up to his own eye. But the real highlight of this video, Matt, was a scene where Jimmy is in what I presume is a park, and he pours an entire bottle of vodka into a half-empty jug of Ocean Spray cranberry juice and then proceeds to chug it in one gulp thing. And then just a couple shots later in the music video, we get a shot of Jimmy vomiting into a pond in the park. And to me, that sums up the magic of this video and some of Jimmy's stuff in general in this period, where I don't know if he's trying to be legitimately edgy or if he's in on the joke that this is like a 16-year-old who just got dumped for the first time's idea of like what being edgy is. But either way, it's another Jimmy Jacobs music video that I enjoyed for completely different reasons. It is, I think it got across his like character change to a moodier guy, and it is, again, worth watching. It is kind of ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
I think he's in on the joke, Trevor. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. But we now bring you finally to Dedicated, named, of course, Dedicated for Doug Gentry. It took place January 26th, 2007 at the National Guard Armory in Braintree, Massachusetts, in front of a reported crowd of 675 fans. Observer Live report from James Brown, not that James Brown, wrote.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
I am pretty sure this was not the Godfather of Soul. There was a pre-show in which Mitch Franklin lost to local Epic something, and local wrestler Handsome Johnny defeated ROH student Surefoot Alex Payne, I think. The crowd was hot all night until the end. The building was standing room only and a huge crowd for the Boston area. And that brings us to.
I was going to dispute you, by the way, but I just saw that James Brown, the Godfather of Soul, died on Christmas Day 2006. So his ticket that he had to Dedicated just went completely out the window. Couldn't use it.
Maybe this show was also dedicated to him. The two dedications.
That's right.
We opened the show with Bobby Cruz in the ring, who tells us that earlier today Doug Gentry passed away. He asks all the fans to rise to their feet to observe a 10-bell salute for Doug, which they do, followed by a moment of silence. Can
I say, like, so some of the stuff that you said about, some of the people backstage having a weird reaction, I'm kind of irresponsible speculation, but did you notice, like, the way they did this 10-bell salute was kind of weird in the fact that, like, that Bobby Cruz was just like, we're going to do a 10-bell salute to Doug Gentry, and then oddly doesn't explain who he is to the crowd, and, like, they cut away really quickly. And it's like it almost seems like Gabe was like, we have to do this salute, but someone else was like, okay, well, let's just get it in and out and not belabor it. Again, total irresponsible speculation, but just seemed a little odd to me. Like the lack of explanation to the live crowd who I'm assuming a lot of them would not know who he was. And then the very quick cutaway, I don't know, just something seems
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah, well, again, I imagine Gabe probably. I mean, I imagine Gabe being the creative head. I don't want to put things on him that he did or I don't know for sure he did or did not. But the fact the show's called Dedicated, he jumps on commentary at the end of the first match to pay tribute to Doug, and we start the show. He's the booker with a 10-bell salute.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think that we're speaking out of school to say that Gabe probably said we should dedicate the show to Doug Gentry. I don't think that's a crazy thing to assume.
But I'm just saying. I imagine what we see is probably a result of Gabe pushing as much as he got, and I imagine also Gabe being the booker. I imagine I wouldn't be surprised if people that were kind of being shitty about Doug maybe didn't do that to Gabe's face. Because I don't think this was probably a fun day for Gabe. I imagine.
But you did know, like that did seem weird, right? That he was like, "We're going to do a 10-bell salute to Doug Gentry," and then doesn't say who he is.
Yeah, if you are a new fan to Ring of Honor, or even an early fan that wasn't paying close attention, you don't really know Doug Gentry.
Right? They never used Doug Gentry's name on Ring of Honor releases. He was Ray Murrow in the old releases. So I just found that kind of strange. I mean, it's great that they did the tribute. It's very important, but there was something strange about it.
And then Bobby then introduces us to ROH's new interviewer, Rebecca Bayless, and she's here to conduct what has become somewhat of a tradition for ROH at this time, which is the show after someone wins the ROH World Title. They open the next show with what is rare for ROH at this time, in-ring promo.
And we should mention like Rebecca Bayless is, in case anyone doesn't know this, Becky Bayless, who was a member of Special K years earlier, and I think she left ROH in early 2005 to complete her studies, right? And hasn't been back since.
Yeah. In fact, if I can go to a note we have from Mike Johnson at PW Insider, he wrote, Becky Bayless, who managed Special K and was a member of Homicide's crew in 2002 and 2003 here, will be returning shortly as a backstage interviewer under the name Rebecca Bayless. She visited at the last New York City event, and the decision was made to use her to add another female to the presentation. She'll be taking the place of the Gary Michael Capetta, who did a great job bridging old school credibility with the company's new talents.
They should call it the Gary Michael Capetta.
the Gary. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Capetta pop up in another role down the line, although that's conjecture on my part. I am really sad to see Gary go. I really like Gary. I thought he had a kind of a wacky, goofy, lovable charm. He brought a bit of the name from the past. I thought he was a legit good interviewer who could act like shocked when he needed to, but also play along with comedy when someone wanted to do some comedy. And, I'll give, my memories of this stuff, as always, is Swiss cheese. So I'll give Rebecca Bayless a chance. I will say on this show, not a great start, I would say, but I guess even Ring of Honor was not exempt to the idea of wanting to get younger and more attractive. Not that Gary is not a stud with some of those sweaters.
I mean, listen, there's a lot of charm to Gary Michael Capetta, but he was doing less and less every time he was involved in recent recent DVDs. He appears on a DVD sometimes for literally 30 seconds, and that's it. He comes out. He's flown out just for that. So I think somebody that is a little more involved, a little bit younger, a little bit more able to get in the mix. I don't disagree with that idea, honestly. As much as Gary Michael Capetta has so much charm, it kind of did seem like a waste a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, financially, I don't know what that would be, but yeah, if it would be cheaper, obviously, yeah. Then at that point, like you said, he was not doing much. But so anyway, new Ring of Honor World Champion Homicide and Julia Smokes make their entrance. Rebecca congratulates Homicide on winning the championship, saying she's known Homicide for a very long time and they've been through a lot together, which gets some whoops from the crowd. She asks Homicide how he's feeling tonight, which is a modern pro wrestling press conference quality question. Homicide chuckles, like he also thinks this question's kind of ridiculous. He's like, I'm holding the Ring of Honor World Title, like this is how I'm doing. I'm the champ. Homicide says the Ring of Homicide World Champion is in this motherfucker right now. Odele Holmes. But then he goes, oh shit, wrong company, my bad. Because, that's not more of his TNA act. Homicide says he feels great, at which point Sweet and Sour, Larry Sweeney, walks his way to the ring, cackling. Homicide compares Sweeney to Tony Montana and says he looks like Magnum P.I. So child of the 80s there, Homicide. Bayless tells Sweeney he has no business here right now.
By the way, that's not the oldest TV reference that Homicide or someone affiliated with Homicide makes on this show, and we'll get to that other one later.
So Sweeney notes that his client, Chris Hero, challenges Homicide tonight for the Ring of Honor World title, and Hero is warming up in his private locker room that Sweeney got him. Sweeney tells Homicide what a pleasure it will be for him to see his client, the best athlete in Ring of Honor, beat Homicide tonight. He calls Homicide the most disgraceful champion in Ring of Honor history, knowing that Homicide wrestles in a T-shirt and doesn't even have gear, unlike his client.
Was this a reference to his old friend CM Punk?
He has to use a ghetto fork in his matches. That actually gets applause from the crowd. Sweeney says he doesn't even think Homicide knows what a cravat is, a move his client executes so perfectly each and every time he uses it. Sweeney tells Homicide he has no honor, which gets laughs from the crowd. Smokes at this point throws his gum at Sweeney, who just takes it in stride and keeps talking. He says, Homicide shouldn't have that title. Chris Hero should. Smokes spits at Sweeney at this point and tells Larry to eat his ass as Chris Hero runs in from the crowd and lays Homicide out with a big boot. Sweeney runs into the ring and he and Hero put the boots to Homicide and Smokes. Hero briefly poses with the belt until Rocky Romero walks to the ring, causing Hero and Sweeney to bail. Rocky gets a welcome back chant and gets on the mic. Rocky asks Homicide where he's been for the last year. He thought the Rottweilers were supposed to have each other's backs. Homicide wonders, what the fuck? And Smokes asks Rocky, don't do this here in front of the cameras. And he tells the cameraman to turn the camera off, which the cameraman does not do. Rocky asks Homicide why he hasn't called him in a year. Homicide and Smokes leave as Smokes says blood is thicker than water. Rocky then stays in the ring. He says, in 2007, the badass is back, and here's Davey Richards is the new badass around here. So he tells him to get his punk ass out here and start off the new year with a bang. That brings us to the match. Before we get to that and before we get to your thoughts, I'll just do a couple quick notes from the Observer live reports. Dave wrote, Romero then came out and asked Homicide how come he hasn't returned any of his phone calls. This didn't get over that big, and a fan even shouted, you have no mic skills at Romero. One fan even in which Romero pointed to his crotch and said, here's my mic skills for you. I don't remember this being on the promo. Maybe I missed it.
Seems like it was cut out, which is weird considering all of the stuff they left in.
Yeah. So I didn't think Romero was that bad on this. It was a very short thing. I thought we'll get into the match, but I thought Romero showed more charisma. He's gained some charisma since the early days of his first Ring of Honor run. But what do you think? This was pretty much just to try and juice up, I guess, the Hero match for later in the night, and I guess break into the tease some tension between Rocky Romero and Homicide.
I thought all these promos were awkward. Like, I thought even Larry Sweeney wasn't very good in this. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, the crowd reacted fine. I don't think it, really made a difference, but I didn't think any of this came off that well. It felt just kind of like everyone was a little bit just, awkward, kind of wasn't sure what to do. The timing wasn't great. Yeah, Romero wasn't any worse than anyone else here. And obviously Romero becomes a lot better on the mic as the years go on. But yes, I agree. He's better here than he had been in previous appearances in ROH, and ultimately it leads to everything we need it to lead to, which is here, Rocky Romero versus Davey Richards.
Yeah, now we finally get to finally, Matt, we did it. Rocky Romero defeated Davey Richards via submission in 18 minutes, 50 seconds when he made him tap out to an ankle lock. Battle of future stablemates, Matt, in the not-too-distant future. The announcers mentioned that Rocky Romero has recommitted to ROH in 2007, which, of course, is ROH code for this person was only appearing for us occasionally, but we have him booked out for a while now. And in fact, he will miss the fifth-year festival shows, but after that, Rocky's basically here for all of 2007. So what do you think about this kind of a re-debut for him?
Yeah, I think he came on strong. I think that he looked great here, was very good at projecting personality compared to what we had seen during the Havana Pitbulls era. He had some, good facial expressions. Richards did too. Obviously, like you said, their future stablemates. Like, this is like a foreshadowing match, almost like they kick the crap out of each other in order to earn each other's respect, and then they end up on the same team shortly thereafter. I actually thought that, Rocky, if anything, came on stronger than Richards did. I thought the crowd reactions were good. I thought that, all the back and forth, between the kicks, I enjoyed Richards selling after. So at one point, Richards kicks the ring post after Rocky moves, and Richards yells, "Oh shit!" and like he does high-pitched screaming when Romero starts kicking his injured leg, which I think is the first time that I've seen Davey Richards sell like that. This is also the first time I could remember Rocky Romero debuting what in ROH would be a catchphrase of his, where he yells "Azúcar" at a certain point after he does a tope onto Davey. And yeah, but like they just do a lot of good hard hitting back and forth. Romero is working over Davey's leg. The selling is good at times, less good at other times, but I do like the ending where Rocky locks on the ankle lock. Richards keeps trying to roll through. Romero keeps holding on and then sits into the heel, kind of like not a heel hook, different version than what what Jimmy Rave's been doing, but he does kicks like to Richards while he's locking in that ankle pick, and Richards taps completely cleanly. And I did not see that coming, and I thought this was the best Ring of Honor opener in a very long time. Like, I can't even remember the last time Ring of Honor had a more substantial opening match than this. And I thought it really got things off to a good start. I really also appreciate that the crowd was really into it after a lot of dead openers in recent months.
So there were big chunks of this match that were decent but kind of numbing to me, and then there were parts of it I liked quite a bit. Like, I really liked Rocky's swagger here. It definitely, to me, feels like he picked up a lot of charisma in his time away from Ring of Honor. Like, he's an asshole here, but a charismatic asshole. He's talking shit. He spits in Todd Sinclair's face, the ref, not once, not twice, but I caught him doing it at least 3 times. And I always wonder, if you're a wrestler, like, do you like, if I was a wrestler, I was thinking like, or a ref in this case, like at some point when I'd be like, man, I hope you asked me before the match, like if you could spit at me that much. But he even throws his robe at Davey before the match, and then Davey threatens to throw the robe into the crowd before the ref snatches it away, which gets boos, and then Rocky goes and gives his robe a kiss. And I was thinking when I watched that, I was thinking, you know, it'd be a fun thing. I don't know if anyone in wrestling has ever done that. Is if a wrestler threw his gear at his opponent like that, and then his opponent throws the gear into the crowd, and then the first wrestler like really regrets it, like I'm gonna need that back, that cost a lot of money, like because I just started thinking, what would have happened if Davey had thrown that into the crowd, like during the body of the match, you get a million kicks and slaps, which I do think you want for a match between these two guys. And the action is fine enough, but this is where I kind of got that numbing feeling, because apart from those bits of personality, just because it's so back and forth, not really building. But then late, I thought this got really fun and more memorable. There's like a nice sequence late where Davey goes for his running Liger bomb, and Rocky reverses it into a Rana, and then Rocky then immediately goes for another Rana, but Davey reverses that into a really nasty-looking buckle bomb, and then he's finally able to hit the running Liger bomb for a nice near fall. And that was just like a fun sequence of each guy, you know, going for the same thing a couple times. And then they go outside, and they each take turns slamming the other guy onto the hard floor. And it's just so simple. Like, neither guy does a big follow-up, and each guy just really sells it huge. Like, and for something about, maybe I'm just getting older, where, like, I just like the simplicity of two guys taking turns slamming each other on the hard floor, and each guy just selling it like it was a body slam on concrete is, like, the worst thing you could ever take. And they really just let it breathe, and I like that. And then we had the part you mentioned that you liked, I agree, where Davey goes to kick Rocky on the outside, but Rocky dodges and Davey hits the ring post. And yeah, I wrote, Davey sells this huge, including some theatrical high-pitched screams. Like, that really stood out to me. I was like, whoa, Davey Richards makes those kinds of noises? That's new. And what I liked about this was it took something I've seen a million times, and they did it a little differently, where you've seen a wrestler hurt a limb, and then that changing the rest of the match a million times. You know, you've seen a guy hit the ring post a million times, but usually like it's early in the match or in the middle of the match, so that that becomes a story that's told for a long time. And here, I think that spot happens with maybe like 2 minutes to go in the match, and from there on out, like the rest of the match is about Rocky going after that leg and Davey getting a couple chances to win, but also Davey just being completely fucked. And to me, what's cool about doing the injury spot so late is that it makes the injury seem more severe, because it's such a dramatic change and turning point in the match when you don't expect it to happen. And also, like when you do a limb story with only 2 minutes left, you don't have to worry about like the guy forgetting to sell it or ignore it, because he only has to do it for 2 minutes. It's a lot easier to work an injury for 2 minutes than having to sell it for 10 to 15 minutes from like the start of the match. And like Davey does a ton of kicks in this match, but because the injury happened so late, it's not, he still gets to do all those kicks in the match and not have it like, it still can be consistent with him selling an injury late in the match. And I liked it. I just liked a good, simple story of two guys are wrestling back and forth, even Steven, for 15 minutes. One guy makes one mistake, hurts himself. He's fucked and now is in a fight for survival, but he can't hold out. And to me, that final run, I really like that. To me, that this is an outright good match. So I enjoyed this as an opener too.
Can you think of the last time ROH had a better opener than this? I can't.
What would have been the openers recently? This is better than the 4-way final battle,
which was the only other really substantial good opener recently.
You know what? I'm just going to say yes and not try.
I mean, the other one I could think of was like Nigel McGuinness and John Walters. This was better than that.
Yeah.
It's been. I genuinely, I'm sure there were better openers in 2006, but I cannot think of them off the top of my head.
And they clearly like gave them the time to make this like a statement kind of match, right? Where like 18 minutes, where let's just like a lot of the first 3 matches on cards lately have been like really short, nothing matches, and this was like substantial.
Right. This was legit, like very good opener.
So immediately after the match, Prazak gives Gabe Sapolsky, announced as Jimmy Bauer the mic. Gabe says earlier today the world lost a very good human being in Doug Gentry. Tonight's show is dedicated to him. Gabe says, I miss him. I will always miss him, and I'll never forget him. And so that's the one time, we get like another tribute to Doug. And we cut to Jimmy Rave backstage, who says it's 2007, a new year for Ring of Honor and a new year for Jimmy Rave and a new submission. You saw BJ Whitmer tap to the heel hook. You saw El Generico tap. You saw Nigel McGuinness tap to it multiple times. Tonight, everyone will tap in the 4-corner survival match. And when it comes to Jimmy and the ROH World Champion, he'll be tapping too. And the only notable thing about this promo is they shot this with Jimmy never looking into the camera, instead staring off to the side. It was weird to the point where I was thinking they were going to pan over and reveal that he was staring at something the whole time. But nope, we'll get to later. This was something Gabe decided to try with backstage promos.
This was a stylistic choice. I really am wondering how long it lasts. And the only thing I remember is there was a time late in WCW where they were trying this also briefly. And I don't know, no one ever sticks with it, probably because it's weird. But I am curious to see how long this goes on for.
I am a huge proponent in wrestling is when you're not the number one company, that like anything you can do that's different, that's even like not a net negative, but just even like a net neutral, as long as it's different, is good, let alone a net positive. This was a net negative because I was just looking the whole time going, what the fuck is he looking at? It was just distracting and weird. But that brings us to let me go back to I had to know about the Rocky Romero stuff from the Observer quick. Trevor, you got to format your notes better, my boy. Anyway, Dave on the Observer, Romero beat Richards with an ankle lock after Richards kicked the ring post when he used the leg grapevine version of the move. It got some "you're not angle" chants. Why was the crowd so on Rocky Romero on this night? Telling he doesn't mic work, that he's not Kurt Angle.
I feel like whoever was sending in these notes just happened to be sitting near someone who really didn't like Rocky Romero, because a lot of this stuff did not come across on the DVD, and the crowd seemed to actually appreciate Rocky. So I think this guy who wrote the review was just sitting near someone who really did not appreciate Rocky Romero.
Dave also wrote, Romero will be getting a big push from Ring of Honor. They teased problems the first night with he and Ricky Reyes, which they teased it with
with Homicide.
With Homicide, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that brings us to the second match on the show. Jack Evans defeated Eddie Edwards via pinfall in 8 minutes 29 seconds after he hit the 630 splash. Dave wrote in the Observer, Evans pinned Eddie Edwards, who is a good flyer who has no experience. Fans gave both a big hand after it was over. Both have improved a lot, and Edwards is one of those guys who could become the next type like Delirious and Matt Sydal have been over the past year, where they've moved up to where they can headline. And, well, that would eventually happen. It would take quite a few years. But
honestly, I wouldn't have thought of it at this point. So,
it's also, again, always funny to think of this was an era, at least among some people, where Eddie Edwards is referred to as a high flyer.
He definitely does not come across that way in either of the ROH matches that he has been in so far.
So, yeah, we get another return here, as this is Jack Evans' first match in ROH in over 4 months, as he had been working Dragon Gate in Japan. Jack, during his entrance walk, speaks into the camera. He tells us that some people watching us may be new to ROH, and so they better ask whoever put in the DVD to explain the man, the myth, the legend that is Jack Evans. And on commentary, Lenny Leonard soon informs us that this match is being taped for ROHvideos.com, which Lenny says they're going to try and get you more quality matches out faster for us, the fans, to see for free in 2007. So really, this match really felt more like a reintroduction to Jack Evans more than anything else. And I would say as a reintroduction, it's decent. Like Jack pops off a few of his signature spots, including his Dragon Gate era kicks and a really nice jumping knee here. He hits a big dive to the floor, but he's also selling for a fair bit of this match because that's another part of what makes Jack special, like his ability to take a beating. I was thinking, like, watching this match, like, for a second, I almost thought it's weird he's taken such a fair bit of a beating for a match that's kind of like a highlight for him, like a squash for not quite a squash, but like a highlight match for him. But then I thought, I don't think I'd ever want to see an 8-minute match, Jack Evans match, where he just dominates pole to pole, because that's not Jack Evans, right? And so to me, like, Eddie Edwards gets to hit a few big moves, like a ring apron powerbomb back when that spot was still a bit of a novelty and the crowd like kind of freaks out a bit for it. He does hit a top rope drop kick as well, so I guess Eddie Edwards is a master high flyer. And I what I'd say about this match is I'd say these two got the exact amount of offense I thought they'd each get. Like, Eddie gets is exactly as much offense as you'd think a company would want to give to a newcomer they see some potential in, and they give Jack as much offense as you think they'd want to give a returning star who also has never up to this point been pushed as like a top of the card singles act. Like, it's not exactly shooting for the moon as a match. It's basically kind of like just a promotional vehicle for these two guys, like a moose bouche, to be fancy, Matt. And I thought as that it was like slightly above average.
I don't know. You say it was decent as a reintroduction to Jack Evans. I thought it was really good as a reintroduction to Jack Evans. Like, not a really good match, but like, I don't know what more I would have wanted out of a match with that goal. Like you said, everybody kind of got to hit what they needed to hit. Eddie Edwards, I thought, looked aggressive. He looked like he was trying to prove himself. And Jack looked like he was having fun and didn't. And, like sometimes Jack Evans could look sloppy, and he didn't look sloppy at all here. His moves hit well. Not much of a story other than like strong guy versus agility guy, but everything was done with gusto. The crowd was into it. Edwards got to do some, pseudo Danielson style bending Jack Evans in half. Like you said, the big power bomb on the ring apron was a big moment for the crowd in that match that even got an Eddie Edwards chant going at that point, which wouldn't necessarily have expected in a match against Jack Evans. Evans got to hit a Psycho knee. Edwards did a cool nip up after his own missile drop kick and his own flying knee, got a 2 count. And I thought another good near fall was the part where Jack drop toe holds Eddie Edwards into the turnbuckle and then goes for a handspring elbow, but Eddie caught him and flipped him face first. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought the part where Jack fought out of a superplex attempt with the knee strikes before hitting the 630 was cool. I thought this was just a lot of fun, and for an ROH Videos match, I thought this was in the higher level of those matches, just because it's a solid, good little undercard showcase match. And, as opposed to just sort of a boring squash, which you get sometimes. And when you get a match like that and the crowd's reacting to it, I think it could be a lot of fun. And I thought this was fun.
And Jack is back, baby. Like, I do like also, whether it was just a coincidence how it worked out or not, I like that they're opening the first show of 2007 with like 2 returns, right? Like kind of, it helps for, new year. Hey, here's some guys. They kind of weren't around for most of 2006. So they're going to be major parts of 2007. Like, here you go.
Yeah. Two returns, and not in like dry matches either. Like 2 returns where both guys get to do a little bit of a showcase. And like I said, yeah. Clearly the match was effective. We got like a pretty loud Eddie Edwards chant after this match. And that wasn't preordained, right? I know Edwards is from that area, but like that was based on the fact that he put on a fun match. And I do think that the crowd really enjoyed this.
And that brings us to the third match on the show. Delirious and Pele Primo defeated Adam Pearce and Shane Hagedorn in 11 minutes, 16 seconds when Delirious made Hagedorn tap out to the Cobra stretch. Matt, before I throw it to you, I will answer a mystery that some people had at the time who were wondering, why is Adam Pearce wearing eye goggles for this match. If you believe Adam Pearce and what he was saying to the fans before the match, it's because it gives him X-ray vision and night vision and lets him see through fat chicks' clothes.
And he says, quote, I can see through any fat woman's fucking clothes. Night vision goggles. Right as he's walking to the ring, he says that immediately. He's like very insecure. He's got to tell everybody that he's looking through fat women's clothes.
I don't think night vision works that way. That lets you see.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Clothes.
Yeah, he did not mean night vision by see-through clothes. That is not the term.
But Dave Meltzer would write in The Observer, Pearce had laser eye surgery this past week and worked wearing goggles. He played it well old school to where they may make that his gimmick.
That's amazing that like you're allowed to do a wrestling match a couple of days after doing that.
Yeah, that's insane to me. Like I am I kind of was thinking about laser eye surgery, but I think I don't have the eyes for it. They say like I have naturally very dry eyes, and they say if you already have dry eyes, you shouldn't really get laser eye surgery because that can exacerbate it, make that even worse. But like I was thinking if I got laser eye surgery, I wouldn't like leave my home or move a muscle for. I know they say, oh, you can do stuff for like pretty shortly right afterwards, but I'm such a chicken. The idea of I'm taking bumps wearing goggles, and he doesn't really half-ass it here either. Like he's wrestling like you would not know from the way he's working that the man just had his eyeballs cut open. But what do you think about this match?
Okay, so this was basically a formula heel babyface tag team match, right? With and they worked over Primo a lot, obviously, because he's the little guy and Delirious is the star. And I will say that, for one thing, I do think that the match made sense. I think, it combined a couple feuds, which is good. And I also think that Pierce's, big offense on Primo did look cool a couple of times. There were a few moments of miscommunication between Hagedorn and Primo. Like, there was a moment when they were trying to do a whip and it just didn't work out, and Primo just started clubbing Hagedorn, and they actually got a little "you fucked up" chant, which I always get sad when I hear, but they recovered all right. But the part where Adam Pearce was just chucking Pele Primo across the ring on body slams, I thought that was really cool. And Primo's a perfect guy to take that sort of bump. I like Delirious sort of getting, just being like a little pest as Pearce was trying to work on Primo. There's a part where he sneaks behind Pearce on the floor and pulls him off the apron, so he hits it face first, while Primo has Hagedorn in a hold in the ring. And so Pearce comes back by just chucking Delirious shoulder first into the ring post, military press style, which again, he really was showing some pretty impressive displays of power here. And I thought that was pretty cool. And when Primo makes a comeback, Pearce just chokeslams into the mat. You really get it. You really give Pearce a chance to just be super dominant looking here. Hagedorn's offense against Primo also looked pretty good. There was a point where he hit a pretty crazy looking tombstone type move on him. And there was the spot where Hagedorn and Pearce do the demolition elbow on him, and Delirious keeps breaking up the pins. And then Primo comes back with he hits a Rana on Hagedorn, a spinning DDT on Pearce, and Pearce kind of has to stand there awkwardly waiting to get that move done to him, and gets the hot tag to Delirious. And at that point, it becomes fairly standard. Delirious throws Primo onto Hagedorn, and then Primo double stomps him. And then they send Pearce to the floor, and Primo goes for a crossbody off the top, but Pearce catches him, and again, in another power display, runs him back first into the guardrail. And in the ring, Delirious just hits the Cobra Clutch backbreaker into the Cobra Stretch and gets the clean win on Hagedorn. I think it probably would have been better if they were building up Primo getting a trophy shot, that Primo could have gotten the pin on Hagedorn. But yeah, I think the highlight of the match was just Pearce chucking Primo all around. I didn't think the match was bad at all, but it was fairly basic, and there were a couple of poorly timed spots there. So, just a fine match. Nothing great, nothing terrible.
Yeah, I agree with you about the style of this match being kind of a formula match and the quality being fine. Delirious and Pele had both been feeling with these guys, so it's natural for them to team up to face them here. But to me, the surprising thing about the match was Delirious is barely in it. Like, he's in at the start, and he's in for like the last 90 seconds to 2 minutes, but the rest of this match is just Pelly, like sometimes doing offense, often getting the cred beat out of him. And really, this is Pelly's match, and like a very easy night for Delirious.
All the more reason they should have given Pele the win here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Pelly earned his. So, like, even when Pelly tags out late, he's back in almost immediately to like join the fight. You know, he gets destroyed when he does the crossbody from the top turnbuckle to the floor, and Pierce slams him to the barricade. But yeah, the match is fine. I like Pelly as an underdog. There is some sloppiness here, as you mentioned, including that spot where, yeah, they're running the ropes, and it's one of those classic running the ropes spots where you see, you know, not from time to time in wrestling where one guy clearly has a different idea of what the spot is than the other guy, and they just kind of have to freeze in front of each other. And Pelly just starts throwing hands because he's like, well, we got to do something. My favorite spot probably came at the start of the match where Delirious and Pelly throw simultaneous crossbodies at Hagedorn and Pierce, and Hagedorn goes down easy to Delirious, but Pierce is holding Pelly, and Pelly just shouts, "A little help!" at Delirious, and Delirious drop kicks Pelly in the back, so the momentum causes Pierce to take the crossbody bump. And I thought that's a spot that just like perfectly sums up Pelly's character, where he has so much heart, but he doesn't have the size, but he like doesn't give up. He's just like, hey, help me. And but then there is that spot, which I thought was absolutely insane, to the point where I like posted a clip of it online, which was the tombstone. Hagedorn does during this match on Pelly what I can only describe as a gonzo bomb, but from a tombstone position on Pelly Primo. Like, normally when you do a tombstone, you're holding your opponent upside down, and they're centered with like one leg on each side of your head, and you have them really held tightly against you. So when you drop to your knees, their head is close enough to the mat that it looks like contact, but you're holding them so tightly enough they don't slip out past your knees. So their head never touches the mat. Here, Shane like gets Pelly in kind of a tilt-a-whirl lift up, and as a result, he doesn't get a good grip of him, and both of Pelly's legs are to one side of Shane's head. Again, it doesn't look like he has a good grip on him, and he ends up with one hand between Pelly's legs and one hand on Pelly's neck to try and kind of guide him. It's almost like a scoop tombstone, and it must have worked because Pelly didn't die, but I watched this on slow-mo, frame by frame, and if Pelly's head does not make contact first, it comes fucking close. Like, it looks like his head hits the mat, and not just like it looks like he fucking spiked him.
And if you watch some very early Undertaker tombstones, it's not that different from the way he would do it, like against some jobbers in the very early days.
Yeah, as Hulk Hogan can tell you, that tombstone's a dangerous thing, brother. He nearly ended the Hulkster's career, as he'll tell everybody. And the wild thing is, Pelly takes that bump, and like within seconds, he's up taking a demolition decapitation. So overall, yeah, I thought this was average. It was, you know, occasionally rough, basic version of a type of match I like, but we've seen a million times. A couple of notable spots, the easiest night you could imagine for Delirious. So perfectly fine. We cut to the Briscoes backstage doing that same new strange promo style as Rave, where they're staying off camera to the side. Jay says they are fresh off a tour of Pro Wrestling Noah where they pretty much ran through their whole lineup, although he mentions they lost the GHC junior heavyweight tag titles. Mark Briscoe predicts they're going to win their 2 out of 3 falls match with Roderick Strong and Austin Aries tonight in 2 straight falls, which, Matt, clearly that means that's not happening then. And that brings us to Brent Albright, Jimmy Jacobs, and Lacey defeating BJ Whitmer, Colt Cabana, and Daisy Hayes in 10 minutes, 44 seconds when Lacey pinned Daisy Hayes after Jimmy Jacobs put her through a table with a senton. Another kind of wild mixed gender tag match in this feud between Jacobs and Whitmer and Colt, and another match where one of the women involved suffers a bad injury because PW Torch would write Daisy Hayes suffered a concussion during her match on Friday night in Braintree, Massachusetts. And if you watch this match, you will see, I will use it as Matt suggested it. I have found a good picture of her after the match, a gigantic goose egg on her forehead from this match.
Did you notice how she got it? Because I'm not totally sure. Yeah, I don't think, like, you know, in the match with Mercedes Martinez where she got hurt, like, clearly it was like she was really being like treated pretty roughly doing spots with guys. I do not think that Daisy Hayes had that happen to her while she was doing spots with men, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I honestly did not look at the notes till after the match, and so like I wasn't even looking for it. So maybe I would have been able to spot something if I was like going to the match going, okay, she gets like really, hurt here. But no, yeah, I didn't notice it till all of a sudden it was like called attention to. But Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, Lacey knocked a guy's cell phone out of his hands and it broke on the floor. Hayes took a bump in the match into the guardrail and got a huge hematoma on her forehead. It looked sick. She didn't wrestle the next night, and people thought it was due to the legit injury. In fact, the finish was was to be a work injury anyway, as Sarah Del Rey knew well in advance she was coming for the second night. And PW Insider would add, the actual angle where she was hurt, Daisy that is, was a planned deal to give Sarah Del Rey a slot in New Jersey, but life imitated art. So that's a weird little thing where it was supposed to be an injury angle, but she ended up getting like a real concussion. So
now some people think that might be what sort of happened with Jacob Fatu at SummerSlam, although who knows at this point, right?
Yeah, weird coincidences do happen. So I've enjoyed the last couple of tags in this Jimmy versus Whitmer and Colt feud a fair bit because they had this energy to them and also felt like they had some big ideas for spots you might not expect from undercard matches in this era. This match has some of that mag energy, but not as much, and it doesn't have much in the way of big ideas. Like, in fact, most of its biggest spots seem to be built around men and women hitting each other. So if anything, this felt like a 2002, 2003 Ring of Honor throwback match where, like, all its focus is on intergender violence. Like, I did like the heels not even making an entrance. They just attack the faces like bats out of hell from the back as the faces are starting to make their entrance. I thought that's a nice hot start. And then from there we get – what I would say is, I guess it's basically they didn't announce it as such, but it's a tornado tag with no DQ because there's chairs, there's a table. No one complains about that. No one stops the match. ROH attempts to use picture-in-picture to keep up with the action outside the ring, which they did on another recent match in this feud. But here they do it worse because it's just two very brief instances of picture-in-picture, and nothing notable really happens during those two instances. And then later in the match, you can hear the crowds reacting to like things outside the ring that you can't see. So like clearly there was stuff you might have wanted to see in a picture-in-picture. They just didn't catch it. It was kind of a weird choice. But most of this match is just people taking turns in the ring, getting the focus, doing a few spots. And it's not boring, but it's not particularly memorable except for those intergender violent spots like Colt's wanting up to do a double bionic elbow to Jacobs and Albright, and Lacey sneaks up behind him and surprises him, and he accidentally bionic elbows her. Albright kills Daisy with a huge German suplex. And then the end is one of those really weird things where the heel team gets Daisy on a table, Jacob sentons her through it, and then Lacey pins her. And on commentary, Dave Priestley is acting outraged, like this is the most despicable thing, ignoring the fact that the face team is the team that brought the table into the match earlier for the express purpose of putting Lacey through it. Like earlier in the match, BJ wants to beat up Lacey, and Colt stops him so that he can get a table out from the ring and sets it up, like teasing like, hey, no, don't hit her. Let me set up a table so you can put her through the table. Lacey avoids it, and so she never gets her comeuppance. But like the fact is, the faces brought the table into the match. The faces were perfectly fine with the idea of her, of like attacking a woman here, and yet you'll have in an angle later in the night this idea of the heels went beyond the pale, they've escalated things by hitting a woman.
Well, I guess the notion from the ostensibly babyface commentators is that Lacey deserves it, I guess, but Daisy doesn't, and that's the difference. I'm just assuming.
Yeah, I mean, that feels very 2003 Ring of Honor. That feels like the middle stuff of Ring of Honor where they were getting slightly less gross, but still gross, where it would be like going from hit women to, well, only some women have it coming. That feels like very 2003 Ring of Honor. But overall, I would call this match a little bit above average. Like, it was entertaining in the moment, but I would also say not memorable, and it did kind of feel regressive in the way of this felt like back to the old days of using man-on-woman violence as like a cheap thrill and kind of like the centerpiece of something rather than maybe just one isolated spot for another pop. But
that's also very similar to the match in Connecticut with Mercedes Martinez in there with against Whitmer and getting the exploder and all that stuff, where it's like that was pretty clearly like the part that was supposed to be the highlight of the match. And in this case, it's pretty similar. Like, I mean, it was like the most memorable. Excuse me, I just sneezed. The most memorable part of this match, and I thought Daisy Hayes definitely did do a good job of, taking those bumps and, her timing was good despite the fact that she has a big lump on her head. And I guess they're saying that she didn't have a concussion despite that. Is that what the reporting
no,
seems to indicate?
I think the reporting said she did have a concussion.
Got it.
But yeah, the Torch said that she suffered a concussion, but the other reporting just basically says she got hurt, but she was always planned to at least do an injury angle, so it just was a coincidence that she got hurt.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty one of the more memorable visuals of the show and pretty fucked up. As far as a match, I thought that a little bit disappointing, like in the sense that I thought that it would have been a little more chaotic and, like you said, a little more creative stuff because, Jimmy Jacobs can bring creativity to his matches, and we do see that later on in these feuds, but not as much going on there. I thought Lacey was good as sort of the anchor heel. Like, she did do a good job of kind of drawing heat to her, but one thing that, because, I actually didn't think there was a ton of heat early in the match, was Albright and Jacobs were double teaming Colt Cabana in the ring. But one thing that did bother me a bit, and the announcers sort of allude to it, is the last time you saw Lacey, there was sort of a big angle where she was spiked in the face and carried to the back, and Jimmy Jacobs goes crazy, like, Lacey, my love, she's been disfigured. And then she's back here, and granted, it is almost 2 months after that, but she's totally fine. And I guess you could argue maybe, like, it's too far out to, like, put, like, a bandage on her face or anything, but maybe she could at least do, like, a promo showing that affected her in some way, or at least a promo where she makes fun of Jacobs for overreacting to it, something like that. Because the announcers at one point say, Jimmy Jacobs has gone insane because his love has been disfigured, but, look at her, she's obviously fine. And I just wish that they would acknowledge that in some way, other than just having the announcers kind of mention it. Because Lacey's just here being same old Lacey that she always has been, after this moment that clearly was a character development moment for Jimmy Jacobs. So I would have been curious to see how Lacey, the character, would articulate how she felt about all that. Maybe that's coming on a future release. I don't know. But I pretty much agree with you about the match besides that.
That's a great point. I didn't even think of that, and that's a great point, especially because also, like, in this match and the post-match we're about to get to, like, Lacey's far more focused on Daisy than anyone else. And this whole feud so far has been about her, like, trying to get Jimmy to get revenge on BJ and Colt for her. And, like, this is a match where it's her first match back, like you just said, after she gets spiked in the face by BJ Whitmer, and yet it seems like she's more mad at Daisy Hayes than anything.
She's just being, like arrogant, smarmy Lacey instead of, like, ultimate revenge-minded Lacey.
Yeah, they just could have done a bit better detail work in terms of, like, having her act the motivation that, yeah, like you said, it seems like it's another night for her. She's doing the act she always does and not really impacted by what literally just happened to her in an angle. But after the match, Lacey gets on the mic and screams at Daisy that her career isn't going anywhere. She says with an outfit like that, Daisy could make a killing as a stripper. She asks who has $1 before Colt chases her, Jimmy and Whitmer, from the ring with chairs. And he and BJ check on Daisy, who gets a big chant as she sells. And what feels like something that has been happening almost every show lately, we get an injury angle or real injury where people awkwardly lift someone as they scream in pain. It's like, man, except with this time, BJ afterwards starts screaming, "Get up, girl," until she gets to her feet, which granted, it was the right move in the sense that it ends up getting a huge reaction from the crowd when she gets to her feet, treating it like that way. But I was like, not good as actual medical advice unless you want to be an abusive father who raises a very miserable star athlete's son, to just scream, "Get up! You can come on! I'm not helping. Get up!"
And nothing as good as nothing as good as Julius Smokes being carried out at Final Battle, screaming about his neck.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ! And that brings us to Samoa Joe defeating Nigel McGuinness via ref stoppage in 18 minutes, 15 seconds when Nigel passed out in the rear naked choke. This is a weird bit of kismet for this match because this match was originally supposed to take place at Final Battle 2006, the previous show, but it got postponed to here because Joe had an injury. So what we end up getting, Matt, on this show is Nigel McGuinness versus Samoa Joe having a match in the Boston area on ROH's first show of 2007. 2 years earlier, ROH's first show of the year was in the Boston area in 2005. Also on that card, Nigel McGuinness versus Samoa Joe. So a little bit of weirdness. Coincidences happen, man. What did you think about this match? Dave Meltzer said, based on live reports to The Observer, match was said to be 4.25 stars and the best thing on the show. What did you think about it?
Oh, well, as far as best thing on the show, we'll have to wait and see. I think that as far as the first half of the show, I'm not even sure if I thought it was so clearly the best match on the first half, because I did like the opener more than you did. And I thought they were similarly good. But Samoa Joe and Nigel McGuinness obviously had a series of, I think, 4 matches in 2005, all of which were good. I'd say one was borderline great. And I thought this was another very good match. I don't think it really rose much above that. I think this is the first match that Samoa Joe has had with this version of Nigel McGuinness, as in not a smarmy, sneaky heel and not someone who is going to cheat to win the pure title from him and things like that. I will say that at the beginning of the match, Joe seemed amped. Like, did you notice how much he was like screaming while he was doing his entrance? Yeah. Like, he seemed like just thrilled to be there.
I was like, does Joe know now that like his ROH days are numbered? Like, probably by this point, because I was thinking that too. I was like, he is like so pumped for this. Is he thinking like, I don't have many of these left?
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, because didn't you say that like TNA told ROH about this in late 2006? Didn't you mention that?
I think so. I mean, the announcement's coming up pretty shortly. Not long after this.
They must have known. They must have known. Yeah. But like, yeah. So I was curious to see if it would translate to his performance in the ring, and I would say the answer is sort of. I don't think he did everything he would have done at like 2004, 2005 Samoa Joe, but I'd say it was pretty close. Like, they start the match almost with like a sort of a parallel to the Joe versus Kobashi opening, where Nigel pushes Joe against the ropes and slaps him hard, which is like what Joe did to Kobashi at the beginning of their match. And so Joe retaliates with hard kicks to Nigel against the ropes. And he definitely does seem energetic early. He counters a running European uppercut with the ST Joe, and he dominates Nigel for a while, at which point the announcers mention Morishima's upcoming debut, but they don't officially announce the match between Joe and Morishima, so I guess, I don't know if that wasn't, I don't know, I guess they have their own way of kind of announcing things on their DVD continuity. But, Joe's moves definitely have pop. He hits the elbow suicida pretty early, and then he sells his own knee after hitting that, and Joe hits a big flurry of punches and kicks to Nigel on the floor. He hits 2 ole ole kicks, all pretty early in the match. But Nigel comes back by doing that rebound lariat thing he does off the apron, on the floor, kind of the floor version of the rebound, and that allows him to take over. He works on Joe's arms. He gets caught in that arm bend back thing that Nigel does, and I would love to see that just be a finish just once, because it does look so painful. The thing where Nigel bends backwards over someone's arm. The crowd always goes nuts for it. I feel like that he should have finished with that, somebody with that at some point, because not too many moves look more painful than that, honestly. Then it becomes a back and forth for a while. Joe does his power bomb into various holds. He hits Nigel with a chop in the corner that's so loud, I feel like it could wake the dead, before Nigel does a couple of headstands and does a bunch of lariats and counters the ST Joe. And then we get a sequence where Joe hits a big boot into a rebound lariat by Nigel, which actually connects this time. Nigel at one point cleanly hits Tower of London and gets a near fall off of that. And then Joe counters a second Tower of London into the choke, and Nigel floats backwards into a 2 count from that. They do a pretty classic Joe and McGuinness spot where Nigel does the headstand, and this time Joe does the running boot right to Nigel's nose, which I recall in at least one of their matches it looked like Joe busted Nigel's nose from that, but I don't think that happens here. Joe actually hits a completely clean muscle buster, and Nigel emphatically kicks out, which was very surprising and got a very big pop, as you'd expect, because how many times has anyone kicked out of the muscle buster? Not many. I know Kobashi did. Not too many people did. But Nigel does here. Joe hits a hard-running lariat, gets another good near fall. And then Joe gets the choke on. Crowd chants, please don't tap. So they're getting into Nigel here. But Nigel passes out, gets the win by decision. So they did try to protect Nigel. I'd say the negative I would say about this match is it is performed pretty aggressively and with a bit of energy. It's fairly predictable in how it's laid out. Like I feel like you and I, if we were like, okay, early 2007 Samoa Joe versus Nigel McGuinness match, these are the spots they're going to do. The one thing I was maybe surprised by was Nigel kicking out of the Muscle Buster, but everything else, it was like beat by beat, you could see it coming this way. They didn't, I think their physical effort was there, but I don't think they were at the peak of their creative efforts, if that makes sense. So I think that took the match down a little bit. I still thought it was very good, but I don't think it reached to like really great levels.
My rating for this match might be a little lower than you, but I think we are like on real agreement about like just the nature of the match, like right down to I literally looking at my notes, I had a thing written where I remember Dave Meltzer used to say a lot where, he'd see certain matches, he'd be like, I've seen these guys so many times, I could kind of call their spots for them. And there were just when you were saying just now about how the predictability of this match, like there were a couple points in this match where I was like, I almost felt like I could call the next spot. Like, okay, of course he would do this, and then he'll probably do this, and yeah, there it is, and the way I would talk about this match is I would say a lot of times in ROH's previous calendar year, I've said Joe in ROH 2006 was playing the hits, but there are different levels to playing the hits, right? Like in 2000, some matches in 2006, Joe was playing like maybe his top 5 singles and playing them kind of absent-mindedly. I would describe this match as Joe is playing the hits, but he's playing his entire greatest hits album track list, and he's doing it with really good spirit. Like there's nothing Joe here does, to your point, like there's nothing Joe does here that you haven't seen, that longtime Joe fans haven't seen a million times before, but he kind of does everything you'd want to see from him on a given night. And as soon as he comes from the curtain screaming, like you mentioned, he has that energy. And I think he does pretty much everything with good energy, a little bit of a renewed purpose. And Nigel kind of plays the hits here too, but because it's that 2007 Noah Nigel, like you mentioned, that Joe has never wrestled this Nigel before, even though he's wrestled Nigel a fair bit. And this night it is kind of like a new match, and this Nigel does match up with Joe's style probably in a way. This big bomb throwing heavyweight style probably mixes with Joe's natural style a bit better than the European more jokey nefarious heel style. And yeah, that hard slap Nigel gives Joe across the face to start, and then Joe absolutely pasting Nigel with kicks. That is a level of stiffness. The rest of the match kind of tones it down. They never get that stiff again. It'd be unfair to expect that, but I was thinking, man, if they could have kept that level of stiffness the whole match, this would have been like low-key Joe 2. Like just because they start off the match like just going for it, hitting each other. But it's unfair. You can never expect that from anybody. That's an unfair thing to ask. So yeah, going through the rest of the match, Nigel goes to work on Joe's arm in the middle of the match, which I was a little torn on because on one hand, Nigel has a bunch of good offense that naturally works on the arm, so it makes sense. But a pet peeve I kind of have is when someone has a known legit injury and you decide to just work on another body part. Like, I'm not saying he should have worked on Joe's legitimately injured leg that Joe had just come back from, because sometimes you have to avoid the real injury for the wrestler's health. But it is weird when everyone knows someone just came back from a legit injury and you're now laser focusing on another body part in the same match, because like you're showing I want to create a weakness, but you're creating a weakness like everyone knows there's a real weakness there. But I imagine Joe was probably having to be somewhat careful. Like there's a spot at one point in this match where Joe does the elbow suicida dive to the floor, and he goes to work adjusting his knee brace right after the match, and you can tell he's kind of having this moment of, oh fuck, did I hurt this thing again? Like no, I think it's okay. And overall, Nigel's arm ends up being like one relatively short segment. Joe doesn't really sell it after the fact, and it's never played up for the rest of the match, so whatever. And the other interesting thing to me was you can tell, probably because of TNA wanting to protect Joe and limit jobs to non-TNA talent, that Joe, Nigel can't beat Joe, but they want to give him everything they can. So to me, like you were saying, that's the notable thing about the match. That's like the story of this match is, Nigel got the kick out of the Muscle Buster, which not many guys got to do at this time. And they let him survive and avoid a lot of Joe's offense. And, and even when he finally gets locked into the rear naked choke, Nigel doesn't tap out. He doesn't verbally submit. He passes out within it. So they did as much as they could to make Nigel look strong in losing. And it was interesting to hear the crowd reactions because before the match, it felt like 80% or more of the crowd was for Joe, like super loud for him. And then in the middle of the match, we get this one really long, one of the like longer ones I can remember in recent ROH history, sustained dueling chants where it did feel like there were some fans that were picking a favorite on each side. And then at the finish of the match, I actually think I heard a couple straight boos, and there's applause for Joe, but it's just very slightly more muted than you might expect based on the reaction Joe got at the beginning of the match. And I don't think the crowd turned on Joe in any way, but I think what happened was once Nigel kicked out of the Muscle Buster and they went to those final few minutes, maybe they convinced a few fans like, oh, Nigel might win tonight. And then there's almost a little bit of disappearance instead of seeing this like special moment, you just got Joe winning. But overall, I would call this like a very strong good, like a real strong 3.5 stars that maybe verges on 3 3/4. Like it's not a great match, but it is pretty darn good. It's about as good as a match like this could be while still leaving you with the feeling that I've seen most of this before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like we're pretty much on the same page here.
And the other thing, did you notice at one point in this match when Joe was at ringside, you can hear a fan scream at Joe, "This ain't TNA, Joe. You gotta bring it." And Joe turns and says something kind of annoyed to the fan. And I rewound it 3 times, and I think Joe says to him, "Bitch, I invented this place."
No, I did not notice that, but you know what? That's a good comeback from Joe.
Yeah, but it is funny that Joe was starting to get that rep, like, hey.
I mean, we watched all of 2006. I mean, obviously,
But also, it's ironic because this fan's going, "This ain't TNA, Joe. You got to bring it." Well, it was actually the opposite. Like Joe was working, against the Kurt Angle matches, he was working his butt off. But
right, it was ROH where he wasn't necessarily completely bringing it at this point, not TNA.
So after the match, the crowd starts applauding Joe and the match more when Jimmy Rave runs in and he takes Joe down. He puts him in the heel hook. Nigel starts to recover. And he looks around as the crowd chants for him. So Nigel eventually decides he peels Rave off. Joe throws Jimmy to the floor, telling him to get out of here, which Jimmy does. And Joe gets to his feet. Nigel tells him that they are equal, and the two shake hands. So I don't know if that means like we're equal for saving each other or like we're equals because I did pretty good against you in that match that I just lost.
It's a double meaning, very deep.
Yeah. Nigel leaves, Joe gets his chant, and then we get our probably 18th play so far of the highlight video of ROH's first 5 years, hyping the upcoming 5th-year festival of shows. Just a couple episodes of Through the Years away, and it is a good video package, so I don't mind seeing it again. And it is now intermission, and Becky Bayless is going to take us with her back through the curtain to try and find some interviews. Immediately after walking through the curtain, we see Daisy Hayes sitting against the wall with her giant goose egg on her head, being attended to by Colt and someone else. And Becky, crack journalist, screams, quote, "Holy shit, Daisy, are you okay?" Colt angrily asks the cameraman if you get your footage. You get your footage. Says he's got a message for Jimmy Jacobs. His pity party is done. Him and his women issues are mind blowing. You can love them all you want, Jimmy. You can tag with them all you want. You can dress like them all you want. But when you start physically harming them, the line has been crossed. Colt says Daisy is one tough broad and she can take it, but Jimmy has escalated things and Colt is ready to put an end to it. And again, just like, how mad can you be when your team also hit a woman, and how mad can you be when you've spent your whole career, like most of the Ring of Honor's career, you've been a part of it. Like, you're just getting mad about man on woman violence now, but I get what they're trying to do. It just feels really ill-fitting for this promotion.
In spite of that, I do think this was a good, well-delivered promo by Cabana. Honestly, probably one of the better serious promos he's ever done. That's including the ones in the Homicide feud.
Yeah, and they're trying to raise the stakes. They're trying to say, because you hit a woman, that thing that never happens here, that we would never do, now the emotional, it's much more serious. But
yeah, Hayes looked really fucked up here. It was kind of upsetting.
And it is crazy, like, she's getting medical attention. She's just sitting against the curtain, like, literally one step after you would step back in the curtain. Like, you would think you'd want to get her to a more a better place backstage, which would be probably anywhere. But,
or a hospital. I mean, it's
exactly.
there's obviously a whole match after what happened with her just then. So I mean, obviously I'm assuming she did eventually go, but yeah, it was really like freaky to see her in that shape, while someone's yelling a promo right next to her.
So next we get our first match back after intermission. Four-corner survival match. Jimmy Rave defeated Christopher Daniels, scored to the ring by Allison Danger, Jason Blade, and Shingle in 12 minutes 24 seconds when he made Christopher Daniels tap out to the heel hook.
Allison Danger, either not in a costume for once on this show, or her costume is that of former ROH valet Lollipop, because that is the one prop that she had.
Hey, they can't all be latex sexy goth nun. They can't all be that crazy. But so this type of match is the reviewer's challenge, I would say, because you always want to try to say something new. But when you've seen a match like this a million times, it's hard to have much new to say. But I did find some new things to say. But this is also a match we have seen so many times in Ring of Honor, and to the point where I've even said this spiel probably before. It's the classic spare parts four-way. You've got the up-and-comer, the three guys who were booked for the weekend but didn't likely have dance partners for the show, after Gabe booked the major matches on this card, so let's just dump them in a four-way. And it's worked very similarly to a million of those matches, right down to the two heels in this match, Rave and Shingo, deciding it'd be easier to work this like a tag match than a four-way, isolating one of the two baby faces. In this case, it's Jason Blade, until Blade finally makes a 1-on-2 comeback and makes the hot tag to the other babyface, Christopher Daniels, who runs wild. We're a podcast that did the man-on-woman violence streak counter of how many shows ROH featured that trope. Seems like software to put it, but trope. I wish I could go back in time, Matt, and start a counter for the number of times ROH has done a four-way where they just decide to work it as a tag match. Because
no, I thought you were going to mention more man-on-woman violence, because this match had that too.
Yeah, it did. So yeah, that is one interesting. There are some interesting things in this match. First off, I'd argue this match is slightly better than I expected. Normally these kind of matches range from like average to above average. I'd put this match around the border of above average to outright good. And again, it's like I've seen this match a million times before. It's just, action from beginning to end, but not like a crazy spot fest level pace, but just action from start to finish. And it builds to a bigger ending where everyone ignores tags as doing moves in the end. And even the finish, which is really good, which is Rave makes a blind tag the wrestlers don't see, and then a wrestler goes for the win only for them to be told their opponent's no longer the legal man, and then Rave sneaks up on them, puts them the heel hook for the win. That's literally the finish we just saw in the four-way on the last show. But yet with all of that, I just felt like everything in this match was done with just a half step more energy than I expected from this match. Like, I guess how I describe it is this is the kind of match, these ROH four-ways, where it's really easy to cheat and get by with a little bit less and to kind of take a half night off. And I felt like everyone in this match gave a real honest effort. Like, everyone here looked good at moments, even although Rave does the least in this match, which continues his trend of tags and multi-mans where he just kind of, as a heel, picks his spots and is very opportunistic. Christopher Daniels feels like a guy who, even though he's half of the ROH tag champions at this moment, and he's not defending on this weekend because, as the announcers mentioned, Matt Sydal is doing a tour of Dragon Gate, so Daniels is on his own this weekend. Daniels feels like a guy they really don't know what to do with. Like, he's super over with fans. He's a bit of a low-key legend in ROH history by this point, and he's got that star power of being in TNA. But you also have to imagine that makes it hard for him to book him because they probably don't want him to lose a lot. So you can imagine my surprise, not, again, remembering the result of this match, like, because I'm thinking, that's probably why they put Daniels in so many tags and four-ways and stuff, is that, he can lose matches. He can be in matches that he doesn't have to win, but he can lose, but he doesn't have to take the fall. So imagine my surprise where he cleanly taps out, not even to a TNA guy, to Jimmy Rave, to give Jimmy Rave like another big submission win. And I thought that was kind of shocking that they gave him Rave like another big win over Daniels. And I thought this was another match also where this is yet another match. We kept talking about this in 2006, where Christopher Daniels in tags and four-ways is infinitely more like sprightly and interesting and less meandering than in singles matches. And there were a couple interesting spots too, like you mentioned, Allison Danger gets involved in a way she normally doesn't. One point, she jumps on the apron. Shingo grabs her, drags her into the ring, tries to punch her, but Danger ducks the ropes. She runs the ropes, hits a satellite head scissors on Shingo. And I would not have had on my bingo card going into this match, Matt, that one of the things we'd see is Allison Danger doing a satellite head scissors on Shingo and Shingo taking a big bump for her, but we saw it. And then the last thing I want to mention is later we get Jason Blade doing okay. Like, so far in Jason Blade's limited RH tenure, I found him to be a completely fine, decent, athletic, flippy-do guy. I don't miss him when he's not on a show, but when he's booked on a show in a match like this, I'm not negative towards it either. I'm like, oh, that's okay. Jason Blade's here. But this is a spot. There is a spot in this match, Matt. In 2006, we were just really starting to have the thigh slapping trend grow, where some wrestlers.
Oh my God! I forgot what you were going to. Yes, now I remember this. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So this is great. This is So in 2006, there's the thigh. I feel like the thigh slapping trend. That's what really started to get going, where people realized, hey, this gets a reaction. And I think thigh slapping can be cool when it's done an appropriate amount at appropriate times, and you do it kind of covertly. Some wrestlers started to do it on every goddamn spot. Some wrestlers started to do it very nakedly and just obviously. At one point in this match, Jason Blade does a flying drop kick off the top turnbuckle, and in midair, as it's about to hit, he does, in full view of everyone, the biggest clap you ever see. He doesn't slap his thighs; he claps his hands in front of himself in midair, like super big wind up.
Like it's almost so poorly timed and obvious that he could to kind of defend it. He could be like, "Oh yeah, that had nothing to do with the sound of the move. I would just that's the way I do it. That's like my gimmick. I clap before I hit a drop kick. It's the clap kick. That's what I call it. So that's the only thing I could think of. Like this must have been done by Scotty Anton in ECW because it is the clap kick. That's the only explanation that I will accept for this move.
We had the match recently where Kikutaro did the gimmick where he was purposely like not slapping his thigh in time to the hits to like as a joke. This was more business exposing than that. Like, I am not an anti-Jason Blade person at all at this time, but in that moment that he did that, if I had been able to press a button that would have opened a trap door in the ring to remove him from the rest of the match, I would have pressed that. I would have been like, that's enough for you for today. You had your chance. Try again next time. But apart from that, I enjoy this a little more than I thought I would going in. Nothing special, but I thought it was a decent generic four-way.
Well, you mentioned that there was a lot of energy, and I think, honestly, like, to kind of spoil my final thoughts on the show, I think that's sort of like the key word for this whole event was energy. I thought that people were just bringing a lot of energy and, pep to the matches, and I think it was very refreshing because, everybody who's listening to this knows how many dull shows that we reviewed, how many low-energy ROH shows we reviewed in recent months. And this show had a lot of energy from almost every single performer on the show. So I think that is, that helped, especially a match like this. Sometimes that's really all you need to make it entertaining. It's just like a lot of, motivated people in the match doing a lot of energetic stuff that's high impact and, athletic, and we got that here. And, it had enough of a story with Rave being sneaky and getting on his heel hook at the end. But yeah, like Blade took a lot of punishment here, but also, and despite that ridiculous missile dropkick, did some cool moves, like ducking a double clothesline from Rave and Shingo and hitting a springboard back body press on both of them. For example, there was the torture rack powerbomb that he hit on Shingo. That was pretty cool. And Shingo did some good stuff. He goes for the, the crazy lariat and bloodfall that he does on Jason Blade. That TKO type move that he does on Daniels. I like the part where, I like the finish because with Rave locking in the heel hook while the Koji clutch was on. I thought that was cool. There was also a spot early in the match where, in order to taunt Jimmy Rave, the crowd chants, "Jimmy" at him, which wouldn't be noteworthy except to say that is such an improvement from all the other terrible things that the crowds would chant at Jimmy Rave between 2004 and 2006 that I'm like, oh, maybe 2007 really is a new era, but I'm not holding my breath for that. But yeah, I thought this was fun, and that's kind of what you want out of this, just fun, entertaining, high energy, high action. Um, and I do appreciate how tunnel visioned Gabe is on this Jimmy Rave heel hook push, and it seems to be working. I would say my only critique of the push is I think they give him the title shot with Homicide a little bit too early, like before the fans at home get a chance to see all of these dominant wins he's having on the DVDs. So when the match finally comes, it doesn't feel as big or threatening to Homicide as maybe it could. But, that's just from memory. I will have that confirmed or not in about probably 6 weeks. So we'll see.
Unfortunately, like for Homicide, that was like the latest opportunity they had to do the Jimmy match because the next night he stops being champion. So, but yeah, I agree that that's another example of, the weird thing about watching wrestling, Ring of Honor at this period is like there is a delay from things. So it's not like, we get to watch at home whenever we feel like, but we can't get lulled into that idea of, like the fans saw what happened on the last show. Like they should be into it now. It's like, no, like there's like a period where stuff has to kind of filter through the fans slowly as they all get their DVDs and watch them. So yeah, I think that's a good point. And that brings us to the semi-main event, the Ring of Honor World Title match. Homicide with Julius Smokes makes his first defense of the Ring of Honor title when he defeats Chris Hero, scored to the ring by Larry Sweeney, via pinfall in 18 minutes, 37 seconds after he hit the Cop Killer. Chris Hero debuts a new entrance theme. It is now no longer We Are the Champions, which makes sense. He's not champion anymore, and he's now a singles guy. But it is Rock and Roll Part 2 by Gary Glitter.
Which was clearly chosen just because he knew that the crowd would chant, "Hey, you suck!" Right? Like that's totally the reason it was chosen.
I mean, it's a great song. It's corny in a way that works perfectly for Chris Hero. It does the chant, give the crowd the perfect prompt for chanting, like you just said. The one thing I will say, and maybe I'm just being too much of a stick in the mud here, if you look up who Gary Glitter is and what he had already been accused of by this time, maybe you don't want to do that in Ring of Honor. Use Gary Glitter music, but
it was a different time. Yeah. People didn't separate the art from the artist. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I agree. You probably don't want to use stuff from people who are accused of that sort of thing if you can avoid it.
So during Homicide's introduction, Smoke screams into the camera, "Line him up, Gabe. We're going to knock him down." And I felt a little bad. I was like, man, the line isn't going to be very long for you guys. But after the ring introductions, but before the match, Hero goes outside and has Bobby Cruz announce that the future Ring of Honor champion does not appreciate the profanity, which of course gets more "fuck you, Hero" chants. And then Hero asks Sweeney, like, how can I be expected to perform to my capabilities with bull crap like that? And I just thought this was pretty cute. But anyway, Matt, what'd you think about this? This is, kind of a, big singles match for Hero and Homicide's first match after winning the world title.
Well, okay. So I love Chris Hero. I think probably almost everyone listening to the show does. And I find his antics in this era very entertaining. But I also can watch this match and understand why Gabe Sapolsky was very frustrated with this character that Hero is playing. There's a particular standard and tone to Ring of Honor title matches. And I guess if you're looking for something different, this match did bring something different. But I thought that this shtick, very much minimized this title match. It made it too much of what I think as like a slight, unengaging comedy match. And so to me, this was like the disappointment of the show. This is a rematch from In Your Face. And I like that match significantly more than I like this one. Hero wasn't as leaning into the comedic aspects of his character in the same way that he was in this era with Sweeney. He did a lot of stalling, kind of almost the, he kind of took over the Jimmy Rave embassy role of doing a ton of stalling, running to his manager, getting the Hero die chants. There's a whole shtick where Larry Sweeney tells Hero to do something cool. And Hero's like, okay, I'll do something cool. And he does it by doing his big flip over from the apron into the ring. And the crowd boos him and he yells at the crowd, like, that was awesome. Again, it is funny. Hero is funny. But, I don't know. It just wasn't the tone I wanted. There was a point where he stalls some more and the crowd chants pussy at him, so he insists, I'm a manly man, which I do believe that Chris Hero is a manly man, but this character that he's playing in this moment is not. I think that's fair to say. Then there's another spot where he's doing like the Artful Dodger sequence that Nigel McGuinness used to do on Homicide while yelling, "You never know where I am," which again, funny, but this is a world title match. Um, even Julie Smokes gets in on the comedy action because there's a spot where once Homicide finally starts beating the crap out of Hero and whipping him around ringside, and he actually bites Hero's ear. And Smokes yells, and I couldn't tell if he said either "they all taste like chicken" or if he says "we all taste like chicken." If it's "we all taste like chicken," I feel like that's a nice statement of solidarity. Just kind of the human community. We together as one. We all taste like chicken.
I think he said "they," unfortunately.
Oh. Well, then there's no redeeming quality to that statement. Sorry, but and then they end up going back and forth. I was kind of sad that Homicide got basically no reaction when he did the STF because it used to be one of his finishers. And they continue to go back and forth. Homicide does a comeback after Hero controls for a while, and Hero eye pokes him. Hero does do a cool move where he jumps all the way to the top rope, backflips to avoid Homicide, but then Homicide knocks him to the floor and does a cannonball from the apron to take Hero down. I enjoyed that. There's a spot where Homicide does the Three Amigos, except Hero turns the third suplex into a cradle and gets a near fall. And then after he kicks out, Homicide does hit the third suplex. Then at one point, Homicide goes up to the top rope and Hero catches him in what Prazak calls and this is, I wonder if the only time anyone's ever used this term, a cravatoclasm, which I thought was interesting. But definitely not the only time Hero did that move, so I'm curious to see if that continues to be referred to as the cravatoclasm. Then there's a spot where Sweeney distracts the ref, Smokes attacks him. Hero tries to hit Homicide with the belt. Homicide ducks and immediately hits the cop killer for the 3 count. I thought that was a cool out-of-nowhere finish. But I thought, as a match, I just found it very unengaging. I thought it had no intensity. I actually thought Homicide kind of felt like an afterthought to Hero's antics. It's just not the vibe I'm looking for in an ROH title match, especially since it's Homicide's first title defense. Honestly, to me, it felt like a TV match from the 90s. Like a special world title match on WWF Superstars in 1996, something like that. Not badly worked, just tonally off. That's how I felt about it.
Yeah, I agree a lot with you. This match was crazy to me. The previous show, Final Battle 2006, just to remind people, we just watched what is arguably in some ways the high point of Homicide's career, where he seemed like, at least to the Ring of Honor fan base, about as big a star as he'd ever been, and really just felt like a huge deal in general, like he was the king of New York at the end of that night. And you come into this show, it's his first title defense, and Chris Hero completely steals the show. Hero's over-the-top heel act is the kind of thing where it can suck up all the oxygen and attention in a room if you let it. And they, I think the shocking thing is Homicide and everybody, they let him do that. He sucks up all the attention in this match. It's to the point where it doesn't just overshadow Hero. I felt like at times it even overshadowed Sweeney and Smokes, who are two very charismatic managers. It didn't completely overshadow them. They both got little moments in, but I thought it overshadowed them a little bit too. Which means, I would say in this match, of the 4 people involved in this match, by far the one that felt like they were taking the biggest backseat and was the least charismatic and the least kind of in terms of entertainment value was Homicide, a distant fourth, which is crazy after where he just finished the last show. Hero spends a good, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes before the match doing shtick, bailing to the floor, and probably then the first 4 or 5 minutes of the match are largely focused on Hero shtick as well. And Homicide first part just completely lets Hero have his time. He doesn't get frustrated. For the most part, he doesn't chase him. He just calmly waits in the ring and lets Hero do anything he wants on the outside, mug around. And, a lot of what he does is really interesting. Like you said, like you mentioned, like the manly man bit, you never know where I am. There's a moment where he kicks the guardrail in frustration and then sells his foot and tells me, like, I think I broke my toe. There's another spot where he gets whipped into a guardrail and you can hear Hero say, son of a fuck, which for some reason just made me laugh.
Anytime someone can be creative with profanity, it's fun.
Yeah, like again, Hero's Act is real. Like I agree with you. I completely agree in the sense of Hero's Act. I'm a huge Chris Hero fan. Really fun here, but it felt like the wrong thing for the wrong night for the wrong opponent, and it felt like it was just overwhelming, like everything else. And it was just crazy to see Homicide be like so laissez-faire about this. And so as a result, like most of the crowd's energy in this match is directed at Hero. Like he's getting a bunch of boos and negative chants, but he's so entertaining. He's actually at one point like gets a dueling positive negative chant. So like some fans are actually like, yeah. And again, it felt like Homicide was like the second banana. And in a way, maybe it was a good thing that Heroes personally took up so much of this match, because as a wrestling match, I felt like this wasn't a big world title level performance. Like the action's always fine. And like you, I liked the ending. I liked how when Hero's going for the belt shot, like how Homicide can get into that cop killer so quickly, and how I like that real sudden finish. But I'd give this match maybe 3.25 stars. Like,
wow, I would have given it like 2.25 stars, honestly.
Wow. So I liked it more. Here's the thing: I am including within that the entertainment from Heroes Act.
Well, to me, that was in some ways a negative.
It is. Like, here's the thing. I think these guys could have like a 4-star match with each other, and Heroes comedy prevented it from being that, but it also did add some entertainment. To me, like, if they had maybe they would have had a better match without the comedy, but I still did enjoy the gimmick in it. But I felt like because of Heroes Act, the match never found flow. Never felt like feeling momentum. Even the final minutes, I never felt like they were building to a big finish. And even in the final minute or two, it felt like Hero was landing the bigger moves and kind of controlling the match. And then, like it kind of felt like Homicide just won out of nowhere, where it was like he was kind of on the ropes in this match a bit, which again is a weird vibe for the hot new, brand new champion. Yeah, so. And I would agree with you. It is the disappointment of the show, and just a real weird. It's not even necessarily as bad. Like again, I liked it a bit more than you, but it's not necessarily the quality. It's just it's not the kind of match you think they would or should have at this show on this point in their careers, based on where they're at. But
if they just did the exact match they did at In Your Face, I think I would have been much more satisfied. Like, that wasn't like a top tier match, but it was a good, solid, like intense match. And I think you want some intensity in your world title match. And this match did not have that. It didn't.
I agree that match was better. And I think I remember there was some 4-way or something we watched in the last year where Chris Hero kind of took over that match with some comedy like this. And I was like, this is a match where that match wasn't going to be great. So I was so glad that Hero kind of dominated with that it kind of filled the match. This was a match where semi-main event Homicide Chris Hero, you shouldn't need the comedy to dominate. Like there's something better. There's something else you can do here, and they just did not do it. But
I think it was just a poorly timed creative choice by Chris Hero, honestly. That's that, and we've heard interviews where Gabe was kind of annoyed at all that stuff. So, as much as Gabe was the booker, I think he did let the wrestlers have a decent amount of freedom in laying out their matches, and I think he probably wasn't so. I'm just based on later on comments. I'm guessing he wasn't so happy with this choice either.
And I will say, I'm not saying that this was anything nefarious by Chris Hero, but I will say this is an example maybe of sometimes you can work a match that's like good for you, but not good for the show or for your opponent. Because like, I do think to the fans in that building, I think you watch this match, Chris Hero probably leaves it more over than he does going in, because he is very entertaining, and he basically, the whole match is the spotlight is on him. But if you're like thinking of this in the standpoint of how is this helping the whole show, how is this helping Homicide, all of that, this doesn't help anybody but Chris Hero, really.
Maybe his mindset was, well, this isn't the main event, so we don't have to leave them with the classic. I could just get over my character here. Maybe that was the thought process.
And we then go to Jack Evans backstage, who says he's as confused as we are when it comes to how an ROH goal has always managed to evade him. Jack says this is going to be the year of Jack Evans. And
Spoilers, it's not.
if you thought you saw something before, you ain't seen nothing yet. And you know this, man.
It's not the year of Jack Evans.
Spoiler, to this day, Jack Evans has never held an ROH title of any kind. Which is kind of a shame. But I forget, I think Jack is not staring off camera on this one. Does that mean this experiment lasted literally half a show? Because the Briscoes did it, Rave did it. I don't think Jack is doing it.
I think we're going to see it on some other future DVDs as well.
Jack Evans is such a big star. He can get away with not doing it. But our main event now, the best 2 out of 3 falls tag team match. The Briscoes, Jay and Mark, defeat Austin Aries and Roderick Strong 2 falls to none in 25 minutes 13 seconds. The first fall was Mark pinned Roderick Strong in 20 minutes 13 seconds after a spiked Jay driller, and then the second fall was Jay pinned Austin Aries in 25-13 after another spiked Jay driller. In some ways, the most interesting things about this match to me were not the match itself, but looking back, like looking at the booking. Like, this is one of those matches where you can see how many boxes this checked for booking for Gabe Sapolsky, where Aries and Strong are about to be broken up. So having them drop a big loss or two on the way out makes sense. And in terms of who they should lose to, the Briscoes, the team who's going to be like pushed as ROH's top tag act in this year, who Strong and Aries beat in 3 straight matches in 2006. Like, they're the best pick. That's absolutely who they should be putting over Strong. The only negative is Strong and Aries have a tag title shot against Daniels and Seidel soon. And so them taking a big, clean 2 fall straight loss here is a little weird. But then I remembered, Aries and Strong were supposed to have their tag title match with Daniels and Seidel a few shows ago, but Seidel got hurt and the match had to be postponed. So I'm sure in Gabe's perfect world, Aries and Strong lose to Seidel and Daniels first, and then the Briscoes, and they probably do the split up angle after this Briscoes match, but instead they had to scheduling. You have to do the Briscoes match first.
Yeah, and I would say that's actually an error on the commentator's part, because I think at one point Leonard's like, the winner of this was sure to get a title shot when Matt Seidel returns, and it's like, well, you're kind of forgetting that Aries and Strong are already getting a title shot no matter what, but hey, whatever.
Yeah, they were already owed it. So, and then you have the Briscoes winning in 2 straight falls, which feels like Gabe's 2007 project, like in the way that trying to train fans to the match and go long and not end in a 60-minute draw was one of his 2006 projects, when he had Danielson and Roddy go to close to the 60 minutes, but still had Bryan win in regulation. And then they went and did a bunch of 60-minute matches. This will not be the only 2 out of 3 falls match we see this year that ends in 2 straight. But of course, the problem with that is that fans, especially in the U.S., have been trained that 2 out of 3 falls matches almost always go to a dramatic third fall. So fans are trained to think that whoever wins that first fall is going to lose the second, and they're not really into it, which in a way is why you want to train that out of them. But you really get a good example of that here, because even when the Briscoes hit the spike J driller, their biggest finisher, the move they won the first fall with, no one in that building is expecting to win the second fall with that. Like, when the ref hits 3, there's this brief pause from some fans, a couple boos, and then some claps start. And it's that very much that confused, like, whoa, that doesn't happen reaction. And
but you know what? That's the growing pains of getting something over, right? That you just like same thing with certain moves, right? Like a new finisher that people don't react to, and it's like, well, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I imagine a few fans in that building, like, you heard a couple of boos. I imagine a few fans probably felt cheated, because I imagine some fans feel like there's an expectation 2 out of 3 falls matches, you're getting 3 falls, right? And yeah, to train someone, you had to do an example like this where you might not get 3 falls, you might get 2. So then you have the match itself, and unfortunately, my longtime battle against burnout on 2006 ROH-style tag matches continues into 2007. We had a nice reprieve from it with that great Kings of Wrestling Briscoes tag match on the last show. But here we are again, and all my same complaints here are valid, I think, where it's a match with a good level of action from beginning to end. The guys are all working hard. There's some big spots at the end, but I'm numb to it because there's no real story or character work. And in part, I feel like I've seen this match a million times in the last year. And I was thinking, these 2006 RH tag matches have aged worse for me than some of the crazy spot monkey scramble matches from 2002 and 2003, which seems insane, but I feel like there's a logic to it in the sense of a lot of those guys in the 02, 03 scrambles and spot fists, I've talked about this before, they're not well-rounded wrestlers. Like they're doing lots of crazy shit, some of it dumb, some of it awesome, some of it both. But most importantly, like some of it isn't being done today. And also the wrestlers in that day were different than the wrestlers today. Like the average wrestler today is a lot more homogenous. Pretty much everyone's in good shape, has gear, at least somewhat well-rounded, has a decent knowledge of the fundamentals. The big guys can fly a little bit. The small guys can do at least some kind of hard-hitting move. To me, 2006 might have been the year where we started the change, where on the indies, at least on the top indies, you kind of had to come correct and have a certain level of polish and have gear and have a bit more of a body. But to me, when I watch those 2002, 2003 matches, they're far more technically flawed than a match like this. But in some ways, I have more fun rewatching it because there's some things in those matches I haven't seen in years where when I'm watching like the Briscoes and Aries and Strong work, I'm like, everyone today is doing variations on this. And in part, that's a testament to Strong and Aries and the Briscoes and all their contemporaries in this era, where they made it big in the big companies and also they influenced other people in the big companies. And this kind of pace and style has kind of become much more of the norm but because of that, it's lost that kind of specialness. And so I feel like I see matches like this on today's TV that are done faster and a little, maybe bigger near falls and stuff. And because of that, I am probably a little hard on stuff like this. And so what I will say is everything that stood out to me in this match were the things I don't normally see, which there were a few things. There was, I like Jay doing an almost blockbuster like neck breaker before he made the hot tag. I liked Roddy doing the boss man slam. I like the spot where Roddy does the usual spot where he and Aries, where he slingshots their opponent into Aries, who is standing on the apron waiting to hit them in the head with an elbow. But this time, Jay hits Aries as he's being slingshot to counter it. And then immediately Mark double stomps Roddy as he's still lying on the mat from the slingshot. I like that the Briscoes hit Roddy with the Eliminator's total elimination. That popped me. I like Mark going for a springboard ace crusher, but Roddy turning to a gutbuster midair. So again, some cool moments in this match. And I did like how they handled the transition between the first and the second fall. Like they had an enforced 30-second rest period between falls. And rather than have Roddy completely recover and start fresh, by the end of that 30-second recovery period, Roddy is still hurt from the J Driller and Aries is still trying to help him recover. And the Briscoes, once the 30 seconds are up, they just attack both of them, toss Aries out of the ring, hit Roddy with another double team move. And Roddy is just fighting for his life. And I like that. I like the idea that like, if you get hit with a big finisher in a multi-fall match, you're kind of screwed. Like you're fighting for your life. You're not going to be able to recover just in the 30 seconds you're given here. And I like how they kind of made it feel like that way. So overall, I would say like because of the hard work and those few novel spots and the final 5 minutes, I'd give this a strong good, like maybe a weak 3.5 stars. Obviously, their match at Unified was way better.
Do you think there's only barely better than Hero versus Homicide?
It was better from a technical standpoint. I was more numb to, again, that numbing feeling I get where I'm like, this is good, but I've seen it so much, where at least the Hero thing stood out to me. Even if I felt in some ways. So yeah, I didn't think it was that much better from an entertainment value. From a technical wrestling standpoint, it is significantly better. Like I was just going to say, not only did I like the Unified match better, I think their match at Destiny was better than this too. But again, maybe I'm just burned out because I've seen so much of this now. But overall, it was a good main event, but it wasn't their best, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't their best, but like their best was, I don't know, to me, one of the best matches of 2006. I thought this was, agreed actually, the third best in their 4-match series. It was behind the Destiny match and behind the Unified match, but both of those matches to me were great matches. So I don't think there's much shame in that. I agreed with you about some of the flaws. The lack of story, the too much back and forth, not enough. Too much of an ebb and flow. Like not as much of a a consistent pacing and a structure. But man, the effort is so strong from these four. Like I feel like they were giving a absolute top tier effort here. I don't even know if I would say they were giving less of an effort than that amazing Unified match. Like they worked so hard. I do think there were some structural problems that kept this from being really great, but there were some legitimate, really big highlights. they, first of all, when Strong and Mark started the match, Mark gets hit with a top tier loud Roderick Strong chop, just like one of the loudest I've heard in a while. And it also reminded me, oh, Mark Briscoe and Roderick Strong just main evented on Ring of Honor pay-per-view for the ROH title like a few weeks ago. That's so weird. That's still every time that happens, it's weird to me.
Yeah.
But there was another cool spot where Mark gets tagged in, and Mark and Jay run at Strong, but Strong backdrops Mark to the apron while simultaneously booting Jay in the face. And then there's another spot where Mark gets backdropped to the apron and then just runs down the apron to do a somersault, cannonball dive. Or actually, no, he does a flip dive over the ring post onto Aries, who's on the floor. I thought that was a really cool spot. I really, really loved the second fall. I thought that there were a lot of the problems with the first fall you didn't really have to think about in the second fall because it was so short and condensed. But just like you said, Roderick fighting with absolute desperation and kicking out after that double neck breaker, the Aries breaking up the total elimination pin attempt, the Roderick's attempt at the comeback and his chops, but then Mark going for the springboard doomsday device and Aries knocking him off the top rope, and Strong hitting the half Nelson backbreaker and then getting the hot tag to Aries, and then Aries just going insane with drop kicks and going for a brainbuster, but Mark landing on the apron, and then they end up on the apron and Aries hits the Death Valley driver. Just every move that Aries and Strong hit at this point, it's like they're fighting for their lives. And I really love that aspect of it, whereas the Briscoes didn't have to be that desperate in what they were doing. I liked the spot where Aries dropped Jay's neck over the top rope and hit the corkscrew splash, but Mark is a legal man, so he didn't get the pin there. And then the spot where Strong pulls Mark off the apron, hits a sick kick on Jay while Jay is trying to hit the Jay Driller on Aries. And then Strong ducks a Mark Briscoe crossbody, hits the Alabama Slam, and then when Aries goes back up, he hits the 450, and Jay breaks up that pin, and then Aries and Jay are going toe-to-toe in the middle of the ring, and Aries hits a roaring elbow and goes for another brainbuster. Mark blocks that, helps Jay hit the spike Jay Driller, and then I thought actually the timing of that last finish was kind of awkward, the referee didn't count right away, and I think that muted the finish a little bit too. But I really liked that second fall a lot, and I think that elevated this match to what I would describe as very good. And like I said, maybe 3 3/4, maybe a low 4 stars, but still a lot better than the world title match in my opinion. I just am so impressed by how hard these guys work every single time. I do think the booking was really clever. I think that it leads to a lot of stuff that's going to happen in the rest of the year. And I appreciated that. I also think that considering that Strong and Aries both took dominant, definitive, decisive losses on pins to the Briscoes' main finisher without any screwiness, I think that you could say you couldn't have booked and laid out a match to keep them looking any stronger than they did despite those very definitive losses.
Yeah, they took it to the Briscoes quite a bit during the match, and yeah, as strong as you could make them look, yeah, exactly like you said, while each taking a clean fall. So, Dave in the Observer wrote, said to be an excellent match, but as you can imagine, nobody expected the second fall finish. Both falls ended with a Jay Driller, a double team stuff pile driver, except it's a springboard jump into the stuff. I guess that is how you would say it. I just love it's a springboard into the stuff. I just love that phrase. One on Aries and one on Strong. The idea was twofold. First, this was to make it clear that the Briscoes and not Aries and Strong are the number one contenders for Danielson Seidel, who missed the weekend because he's working for Dragon Gate. Again, Dave, is it because they're about to get a tag title shot before the Briscoes? But anyway, Dave writes, the second is that because everyone in the U.S. knows that who always wins the second fall in a best of three, the person who loses the first, it was an educational deal similar to doing the 56 minutes and doing a pinfall or doing a short world title match, just so fans know that anything is potentially possible. So I also did like during the match at one point, Lenny Leonard on commentary, he's talking about how these two teams have wrestled each other so much and they know each other so well. And then immediately afterwards, after he says that, Jay and Aries do the same, put Aries in a head scissors. He pops out and drop kicks his opponent in the head spot. And Lenny's like, well, I guess he should have remembered that, like the spot Aries does every match. But I thought was a cute moment. So after the match, the Briscoes shake hands with Aries and Strong. We're all faces here. Jay screams, 2 straight, motherfuckers. And then we go backstage where Homicide and Samoa Joe are facing off with Julius Smokes in the background. Homicide calls Joe big homie, and Joe calls Homicide man. Joe has a big old red mark on the side of his face from his match tonight. Homicide points out that he has a title that Joe used to have for 1,000 months. And Joe says it might have been 2,000. Homicide says tomorrow night in New Jersey, they face off again. And this time, everything is in reverse. I am not getting fucked over this time. You are. And then as soon as Homicide says that, it's almost like he remembers he's a babyface. Because then he goes, but I don't want to fuck you over. I'm going to beat you cleanly, son. And he goes, the friendship, the hatred, we're going back to 2003, 2004 tomorrow night. Homicide says he's not scared of Joe, and Joe's an icon of Ring of Honor, but so is he. Joe says, Joe who's been mostly smiling and playing along with this, kind of gets angry by the end, and he goes, you appear to have forgotten who I am. Joe says, after I'm done tomorrow, I hope you have some heavy hitters in the crowd. And Joe just storms off. Smokes is just very happy. Smokes says, line them up. We're going to knock them down. We're balling. And I really like the energy Homicide brought to this, where he's prodding Joe a bit, but he was doing it in a friendly babyface way, and Joe was good-naturedly taking it until that part right near the end. And I thought he struck the right balance for this, where his character's at this point, where he's clearly got this chip on his shoulder about how Joe's beaten him so much, but he's in a great place in his career. He's confident. He's riding high. He and Joe are now friends in storyline the last few months. And so I like that they didn't try and create some short-term, heat angle. It was more just, he's going to talk a bit of trash. Joe's going to get a little peeved. They're going to have a match. They're going to be fine,
Well, you left out the most important part of this promo, Trevor, and you're so thorough, I'm very surprised. Which is after Joe's rant at the end, and when he walks away, Julius Smokes calls him Buffalo Butt from Good Times and calls him Bookman, which I think is the only time ever in wrestling history that somebody has verbally compared their rival to Nathan Bookman, the super on Good Times. And so that is why I mentioned earlier that this is actually my favorite old TV reference on this entire DVD. And what I will just say is, keeping your head above water, making a wave while you can. I'm sorry. I apologize to everybody for that.
You know what?
Okay, sorry.
I have a confession to make, which is the reason why I did not include that recap is I couldn't quite understand what he said, and that's because I've never seen an episode of Good Times. That's my shame, Matt.
Have you at least heard the theme song?
I've heard other people sing parts of it. I don't think I've heard the theme even.
Well, if I wasn't so scared of copyright stuff, I would embed the theme song into this episode, but I will not do that. Everybody just go listen to the Good Times theme song and just reminisce about Bookman and his and his nickname of Buffalo Butt.
Was Good Times with Jimmy Walker, where he said dynamite?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I know about Good Times.
It's one of the things to know about it.
I mean, it is the thing to know about Good Times. But with that being said, Matt, it is now time. The show is over to give the Matt F. Trophy. Will it go to Jimmy Walker? It
will not go to Jimmy Walker. I feel like that would undermine the spirit as that he is, not on the show. So I think you are going to be surprised by who I give the Matt F. Trophy to here. I'm going to give it to Rocky Romero because I thought that I just did not expect him to come on so strong on his return and make such a good impression, especially considering how hard we'd been on him in his entire last ROH run. And I know you in particular were not a fan of the Havana Pitbulls during that run. And I thought that he just put on a hell of a good performance and made himself feel like he was an important member of the roster and someone to look forward to seeing. And I do look forward to seeing what he continues to do. Although I have bad news for you, Trevor. His next appearance on the next show will involve tag teaming again with Ricky Reyes.
Yeah. And credit to him, like I think that's a good choice. Like, not that I have any control over the Manaf Trophy, the sanctity of that, but I do think, yeah, like he definitely came into the show. It felt like he had, like I said before, like he had gained a step charisma wise, which makes those weird comments from the live fans so much weirder because like this is not the show to get on Rocky Romero for charisma.
I believe this was one or two people, Trevor. You're not going to convince me otherwise.
You know what's interesting? I was also thinking about the show is like, you look at the show. If I told somebody, or at the time in 2007, okay, there's 3 people on the show. 2 of them will be the next 2 bookers of Ring of Honor, and one of them is going to be and there's someone else who's going to become a big power player in wrestling. And I don't know if anyone if I asked 1,000 people would say the next 2 bookers are Adam Pearce and Delirious, and the power player is Rocky Romero, who basically is like basically office for 3 companies and like keeps them all, CMLL, New Japan, and AEW, and is like, really, and also like getting guys onto MLW shows and all. Like he's really one of the power players in wrestling, and like who would have guessed that of this group of people? But
very, very, very true. Very true.
So yeah, that was the show, and I will say this, Matt, you were 100% right about the dry winter or autumn or whatever of shows that were not as good at the end of 2006. You were right about Final Battle being amazing, and as the recollections were, you said. You kind of helped me on this show because you said about the next 2 shows where I was like, oh, maybe we're through the dark times. It's like, well, there's a couple shows before we get to, the 50th year festival and things get better. This show, and I think from one comment you might agree that you made during the show, you might agree, this show was better than I remembered it. It was not an amazing show, but this is the way I would put it. It is a very easily skippable show, but it's also a very easy watchable show. Like, I'm not going to go say anyone needs to go out of their way to watch this show, but if you do watch it, it is very watchable. Like, everything is enjoyable, most things to some level. And there's a lot of things where I was like, oh, that's a little bit better than I did going in. So, to me, this is a good B show.
Yeah, this is the sort of show that you want as just like a standard non-special ROH show, right? Like, this is like, yeah, and I agree with you, better than I remembered. And worlds better than most of those fall 2006 shows. Just, first of all, the energy, which is like what I said earlier, like the main watchword for the show, there was just so much more energy from the wrestlers, from the audience. Like, it just felt fresher. And yeah, this is the vibe that you want. Like, yeah, like there was the man-on-woman violence, which, again, continues to be endemic in ROH. It's less of it now than there used to be, but it's still going to keep creeping in. But the matches were high energy. The effort was there. There were some very, very, very good matches on this show. There were certainly no matches of the year or anything like that, but a absolutely entertaining show and a huge improvement from what we've been dealing with. If I would say, if we watch 5 shows at a time and 3 are this quality and 2 others are better, I'm very happy with that. This is what I want from just a standard B show. I really have very few complaints. Honestly, my biggest complaint is that world title match. I think if they had a good world title match that was the level of what you'd want from a Ring of Honor world title match, I would have thought this was a very good show, honestly. As it is, it's a good show.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get lucky 2 for 2 with our next show. I don't know if we will. I have a feeling we won't for some reason. But
well,
so
that one I remember a little bit more.
Oh no. But so if you want to contact us, through the years at gmail.com, THROH for through. We have at Trevor Dame on Twitter and at Mayor MGF for Twitter for Matt. Hey, again, check out the Between the Sheets Patreon if you're interested in the Ring of Honor thing. I've found time to listen to the first 2/3 of it. It's detail that, I still think our At Our Best show is good if you want a 3-hour summation of the Rob Feinstein scandal. That's the the day course. If you want like to get the degree in it, if you want in obscene amounts of detail, I mean, Bix and Zellner have got you covered. Cubs fan, I also might as well mention Cubs fan. Go look at Lucha Blog if you have any passing interest in Lucha. I mean, Cubs is the best, and might as well give a plug to him. And so next time on the show, we will be covering Battle of the Icons, the second half of this double show. They go to New Jersey. It is Samoa Joe versus Homicide for another time, but not the last time in Ring of Honor, not even the last time in 2007. On top of that, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs have another match. I think it might be like Last Man Standing. The Havana Pitbulls have their last tag match in Ring of Honor facing the Briscoes yet again. Sure, there'll be plenty of other stuff. We will see if we get lucky, and it's a second time in a row we're surprised that it's better than our memories. But either way, we will have a good time. And so that means until next time, you should have a good time. Have a great time. Rest in peace, Doug Gentry.